Tonight, we're diving into 28 random facts about the lore of House of the Dragon. This is one of those topics with more beneath the surface, but I'll keep the tone calm so you can relax into the story. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here, and if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. Imagine, if you will, a world where the sky is never truly empty. Long before the days of Daenerys Targaryen and her 3 lonely dragons, there was a time when the horizon was thick with the beating of leathery wings, and the air often carried the faint, metallic scent of dragon fire. This was the era of the Targaryen zenith, a period roughly 200 years before the events we all witnessed in the original series. It was a time of immense wealth, terrifying power, and a family that stood so far above the rest of the world that they truly believed they were closer to gods than to men. But as we know from the history of our own world, the higher a dynasty climbs, the more devastating the eventual fall becomes. The story we are exploring tonight is one of blood, both the kind that flows through veins to grant the power of dragon riding, and the kind that is spilled on the battlefield when brothers turn against sisters. We are looking at a period in Westerosi history known as the Dance of the Dragons. It is a name that sounds almost poetic, perhaps even beautiful, until you realize it refers to a scorched earth civil war that tore the 7 kingdoms apart and nearly extinguished the most powerful bloodline the world had ever seen. But to understand the war, we have to understand the world that existed just before the first flame was thrown. We have to look at the architecture of the Red Keep, which in this era was a place of vibrant tapestries and a version of the Iron Throne that was far more jagged and menacing than the one we saw in the later years. We have to understand the customs of the Valyrians, a people who fled a cataclysmic doom and brought their strange, beautiful, and often incestuous traditions to a land that never quite knew what to make of them. The Targaryens were survivors of the doom of Valyria, a mysterious event that wiped out an entire civilization in a single day of fire and ash. They were the only dragon lords to escape, settling on the gloomy island of Dragonstone with their beasts and their secrets. For over a century, they looked westward, toward the 7 kingdoms, until Aegon the Conqueror decided that the continent should be one realm, under one king and one godlike family. By the time we reach the era of House of the Dragon, that conquest is a distant memory, and the Targaryens have become the very fabric of Westeros itself. However, beneath the surface of this golden age, cracks were beginning to form. These cracks weren't caused by outside invaders or peasant revolts, but by the weight of the crown itself and the impossible questions of succession. Who has the right to rule? Is it the chosen heir of a king, even if that heir is a woman, in a world that fears female power? Or is it the firstborn son, regardless of the king's wishes, simply because tradition dictates that a crown must pass to a male head? This central conflict is what drives our journey tonight. We are going to peel back the layers of this history, looking at the obscure details that George R.R. Martin tucked away in the pages of his fictional history books. We will look at the biology of the dragons themselves, creatures that never stop growing until the day they die, and the strange, psychic bond they share with their riders. We will examine the political machinations of the Hightowers, an ancient family from Oldtown who saw an opportunity to place their own blood on the throne and took it with both hands. We will also explore the real-world inspirations that ground this fantasy in human truth. While the dragons are creatures of myth, the motivations of the characters are rooted in the very real history of the English Middle Ages, specifically a period of chaos known as the Anarchy. By looking at these connections, we can see that the Dance of the Dragons is more than just a story about monsters. It is a story about the fragile nature of peace and the way that ambition can blind even the most well-intentioned rulers. As we move through these 28 facts, think of them as pieces of a larger mosaic. Some will be about the production of the show, the grueling hours actors spent on mechanical dragons, or the linguistic secrets of High Valyrian. Others will be deep lore deep dives into the lives of characters like Daemon Targaryen, the rogue prince, whose ambition and lethality made him the most dangerous man in the realm, or Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake, whose voyages brought more wealth to his house than most kings could ever dream of. There is a certain melancholy in this lore, because we know where it leads. We know that the dragons at the height of their power will eventually become nothing more than skulls in a basement and stories told to children. We know that the unity of the realm will be shattered, but there is also a profound beauty in seeing the world at its most magical and most dangerous. It is a world where a single command in an ancient tongue can change the course of history, and where the bond between a rider and a dragon is the most sacred thing in existence. So, as we settle in to look at the intricacies of the Targaryen dynasty, from the jagged blades of the Iron Throne to the secret prophecies passed from king to heir, let yourself be transported back to a time of fire and blood. Let the details of this world wash over you, from the height of the wall in the north to the sun-drenched towers of Oldtown in the south. We are going back to a time when the dragons ruled the sky, and the fate of the world rested on the shoulders of a family that was both magnificent and deeply, tragically human. The history of Westeros is long and blood-soaked, but the period of the dance is perhaps its most pivotal moment. It is the hinge upon which the world turned, moving away from the age of magic and toward the age of men. By understanding these 28 facts, you aren't just learning trivia, you are uncovering the foundation of the entire Game of Thrones universe. You are seeing why the world became the way it did, and why the name Targaryen still carries such weight hundreds of years later. We will look at the way the dragons were named, the colors of their scales, and the specific ways they fought in the air. We will discuss the Great Council of 101, a moment that set the stage for all the conflict to come. We will even touch upon the strange and often terrifying reality of living in a city like King's Landing, when dozens of dragons are housed just a few miles away in the Dragon Pit. This is a journey into the heart of a legend. It is a deep dive into a world that feels as real as our own history, populated by characters who are capable of great love and even greater cruelty. Whether you are a scholar of the books or a newcomer who just wants to know more about the world of the show, there is something here for you. The lore of House of the Dragon is a rich tapestry, and tonight we are going to pull on the threads to see what lies beneath. From the shores of Dragonstone to the stepstones where the sea snake fought his wars, to the heights of the Eyrie where the Arryns watched the skies, we are covering the length and breadth of the realm. We are looking at the symbols, the mottos, and the secrets that define this era. This is the story of a family that had everything and chose to burn it all down. It is the story of the beginning of the end, and it all starts with the facts that built this world. So take a deep breath and let the atmosphere of the Seven Kingdoms surround you. The candles are lit, the maesters have opened their scrolls, and the dragons are restless in their pits. It is time to uncover the truths that have been hidden in the shadows of the Red Keep for centuries. It is time to understand the true cost of the Iron Throne and the weight of the blood that was shed to keep it. As we begin this exploration, remember that in the world of ice and fire, history is written by the survivors, but the truth is often found in the margins. We are going to find that truth together, one fact at a time, moving through the history of the most fascinating dynasty ever imagined. Let us begin our descent into the lore of the dragon, where the fires are hot, the blood is thick, and the stories never truly die. The Targaryens always said that they were closer to gods than men, but as we look at the facts of their lives, their wars, and their eventual decline, that they were subject to the same flaws as anyone else. Pride, jealousy, love, and the simple desire to be seen and heard. These are the things that fueled the Dance of the Dragons. These are the things that make this lore so compelling. And these are the things we are going to break down tonight, in this deep dive into the world of House of the Dragon. Every dragon has a name, every king has a secret, and every war has a beginning. Tonight, we find out what they are. We will explore the lineage of the Velaryons, the power of the Hightowers, and the internal struggles of the Targaryens themselves. We will look at the physical reality of the world, from the way the Iron Throne was constructed from the swords of the fallen, to the way the dragon riders used specialized saddles to stay mounted during high-speed aerial combat. The world of George R.R. Martin is vast, and House of the Dragon is a crucial piece of that puzzle. It provides the context for everything that comes later. It explains why the North remembers, why the Lannisters are so hungry for power, and why the return of dragons to the world was such a world-shaking event. But before we can understand the return of magic, we must understand its peak. We must see the world when dragons were common, when the Targaryens were at their most formidable, and when the seeds of their destruction were first planted in the fertile soil of King's Landing. So, let us step back through the mists of time, past the fall of the Mad King, past the reign of the unlikely kings, all the way back to the time of Viserys the Peaceful. A time when the realm was at rest, but the storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. A time of 28 facts that will change the way you look at the Seven Kingdoms forever. This is the deep dive you have been waiting for. A journey into the very soul of Westeros, where fire and blood reign supreme. We will look at the specific year the series begins, which is roughly 172 years before the death of the Mad King and the birth of Daenerys. This specific placement in the timeline is vital because it shows us a Westeros that is still relatively young as a unified nation. The wounds of the conquest have healed, but the scars remain. The different kingdoms, from the Reach to the north, are still learning what it means to be part of a single empire, and the Targaryens are the only thing holding it all together. We will also discuss the source material, the book Fire and Blood, which is written as a historical text by a maester. This is important because it means the facts we have are often colored by the biases of the person writing them. Was Rhaenyra truly the realm's delight, or was she a frustrated heir pushed to the brink? Was Aegon II a usurper, or a son doing his duty? The lore is full of these ambiguities, and tonight we will navigate them together. As we go through each of the 28 points, you will see how they connect to form a larger narrative. You will see how a single decision made by King Viserys could lead to a catastrophe decades later. You will see how the personality of a dragon can reflect the personality of its rider, and you will see how the geography of Westeros influenced the strategy of the war. This is a world of immense detail, from the heraldry of the minor houses to the specific ingredients in a cup of dream wine. We won't cover every single thing, but we will cover the most interesting, the most random, and the most vital facts that define this era. So, sit back, relax, and let the history of the Targaryens unfold. The dance is about to begin, and the dragons are ready to fly. We are going to look at the actors who brought these characters to life, and the incredible effort it took to make this world feel lived in and authentic. We will talk about the massive sets, the intricate costumes, and the way the showrunners sought to differentiate this era from the one we already knew. This isn't just a prequel. It's an expansion of a universe, a way to see the familiar through a new lens. The stakes could not be higher. This is the story of how the most powerful family in the world lost its greatest weapon. It is the story of how a civilization began to forget its own magic. And it is a story that continues to resonate, because it is, at its heart, about the things that make us human. The desire for legacy, the fear of being forgotten, and the lengths we will go to protect the ones we love. As we prepare to enter the first of our 28 facts, keep in mind the scale of what we are discussing. We are talking about a dynasty that ruled for 3 centuries. We are talking about creatures that could melt stone, and we are talking about a war that changed the map of the world. This is House of the Dragon, and this is the lore that makes it legendary. In the quiet moments before the storm, there is a sense of peace, but it is a fragile peace. The facts we are about to explore will show you just how thin the ice was. They will show you the hidden dangers and the secret alliances. They will show you the beauty of a dragon in flight and the horror of a dragon in battle. So let us begin. Let us go deep into the history, the production, and the mythology of the Targaryen world. Let us look at the 28 random facts that define House of the Dragon and the world of Game of Thrones. The journey starts now, in the heart of the 7 kingdoms, under the shadow of the dragon's wing. We will start with the timeline, move through the characters, explore the dragons, and finish with the production secrets that made the show a global phenomenon. Each fact is a window into a different part of this world, a way to see the complexity and the craft that went into creating it. Whether it's the inspiration for the Red Wedding or the specific way a dragon's fire is rendered on screen, every detail matters. The lore of Westeros is a gift that keeps on giving, and tonight we are going to unwrap it together. We are going to find the hidden gems and the shocking revelations. We are going to see the world as the Targaryens saw it, a place of endless possibility and terrifying responsibility. So, As we move into the main body of our deep dive, keep your eyes on the horizon. The dragons are coming, and the history of the Seven Kingdoms is about to be written in fire and blood. Let us look at the facts, the stories, and the legends that make House of the Dragon one of the most compelling narratives of our time. From the first king to the last dragon, the story of the Targaryens is a cycle of greatness and madness. Tonight, we are focusing on the peak of that cycle, the moment just before the descent. It is a moment of high drama and deep lore, and we are going to explore every inch of it. Get ready for 28 facts that will deepen your understanding and appreciation of this incredible world. We are going beyond the surface, beyond the headlines, and into the very heart of the lore. This is the House of the Dragon Deep Dive, and it begins right now. Let's orient ourselves. The story we are diving into in House of the Dragon takes place roughly 170 years before the birth of Daenerys Targaryen, 170 years before she walked into a pyre and changed the world. This means everything you remember from Game of Thrones, the decaying dynasty, the desperate scramble for power, the faint whisper of magic fading from the world. None of that exists yet. This is a younger world, a more confident world, a world that has not yet learned the meaning of its own fragility. This is the era of absolute Targaryen peak power. The family has ruled for just over a century. The great houses have bent the knee. The faith militant has been disbanded. The realm is united, not by parchment and treaties, but by the direct, terrifying presence of fire made flesh. At this point in history, the Targaryens do not just sit the throne as kings. They exist as something closer to gods. They ride dragons. They command the only weapons of mass destruction in the known world. There are around 20 dragons alive at this time. Some, like Vhagar, are massive enough to blot out the sun. The crown does not need to negotiate with its vassals. It needs only to remind them of the shadow that passes overhead. This creates a profound psychological weight for everyone living in this era. Think about how the people of Westeros view their rulers in the main series. The Targaryens are a memory, a story, a line of mad kings and dead princes. Here, the dragon is not a myth. It is a constant presence. You can look up and see a Targaryen princess dancing through the clouds. The doom of Valyria happened 4 centuries ago, a cataclysm that destroyed the greatest civilization the world had ever known. But the Targaryens survived it. They survived the doom, they conquered a continent, and they built an empire. To the lords and small folk of this age, the dragons are not a diminishing resource. They are an eternal feature of the natural order. The sky belongs to them. And this sense of invulnerability, this unshakable belief that the dynasty is immune to the laws of mortality, is the exact arrogance that will shatter them. We are watching the story of a family that has never known defeat. The wars they fought were conquests. The rebellions they faced were crushed. They have never seen a dragon truly die in battle. They have never had to imagine a future without fire. And this is the direct link to Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons. When we meet her in Game of Thrones, she is the last of her line, a refugee, an exile. She is the end of a long, slow decline. Her entire arc is about resurrection, about bringing something back from the dead. But what she is trying to resurrect is this exact era. She hatches 3 dragons, and she looks upon them as if she is looking at a lost part of herself. And in a way, she is. The blood of old Valyria runs thickest in her, because she is the culmination of everything that came before. She carries the spirit of Rhaenyra, the ambition of Daemon, the tragic weight of the civil war we are about to explore. When she says she wants to break the wheel, she is trying to remake the world in the image of her ancestors. To understand how a dynasty this powerful, this absolute, could collapse so completely that it produces a lonely girl selling her brother's crown for a ship across the narrow sea, we have to step back. We have to look at the entire arc of the Targaryen reign. Their dynasty stretched across 3 centuries, 300 years of rule. The Dance of the Dragons is the fracture point, the moment the stone begins to crack. But the foundation of that stone, the story of Aegon the Conqueror and his sisters, the forging of the Iron Throne, the century of peace and prosperity that followed, that is the framework we need to understand before we watch it burn. That is the subject of the next chapter, the 300-year dynasty. We left off with the Targaryens at the height of their power, their dragons casting shadows across a continent that had bent the knee in fire and blood. But that peak was never meant to last. For 300 years, the family ruled the Seven Kingdoms from the Iron Throne, a reign that began with Aegon the Conqueror and his sisters, and stretched through dozens of kings and queens, through peace and prosperity, through madness and war. It was a dynasty, built on the backs of the most fearsome creatures the world had ever known. But the same fire that forges a kingdom can also burn it to the ground. And the moment that burn began, the moment the dynasty cracked, came not from an outside invader or a rebellion, but from within. It came in the form of a civil war that would forever change the course of Westerosi history. The Dance of the Dragons was not a mere succession dispute. It was a family feud waged with living weapons, and it marked the turning point where the Targaryen Empire began its long, slow fall. When Aegon I first set foot on the mainland of Westeros, he did not have a massive army. He had 3 dragons and a vision of unity. The 7 kingdoms of the time were fractured, fighting each other constantly, and Aegon used that chaos to his advantage. Balerion the Black Dread was said to have been so large he could swallow a mammoth whole, and with that kind of power, the other houses quickly realized that resistance meant annihilation. The Field of Fire saw thousands of men burn alive in a single afternoon, and from that ash, the Iron Throne was forged. For the next century and a half, the Targaryens solidified their rule, building the Red Keep, establishing the King's Peace, and allowing the realm to prosper under a single banner. It seemed as though the dynasty would last for another 1,000 years, but the dragons were both the source of their strength and the seed of their destruction. The family began to treat their creatures as symbols of authority rather than living beings, and when disagreements arose over who should sit on the throne, the dragons became the ultimate arbiters of the dispute. The seeds of the dance were planted when King Viserys I chose his daughter Rhaenyra as his heir. It was not an unprecedented decision, but it was a controversial one. Westerosi tradition favored male heirs, and when Viserys remarried after the death of his first wife, his new queen, Alicent Hightower, bore him sons. The eldest of those sons was named Aegon, and as he grew, the court began to divide along invisible lines. On one side stood Rhaenyra, the named heir, a strong-willed woman who had been groomed for leadership her entire life. On the other side stood Aegon II, a young man pushed forward by his mother and his grandfather, Otto Hightower, who served as the hand of the king. When Viserys finally died, the transition was anything but peaceful. Aegon was crowned in the Red Keep, while Rhaenyra was at Dragonstone, and the news hit her like a thunderbolt. The realm was asked to choose sides. Those who swore oaths to Rhaenyra were called the Blacks, while those who backed Aegon were called the Greens, named after the colours worn by the Queen at a tournament years earlier, and both sides had dragons. This was not a war fought by armies clashing on open fields alone. Every major battle involved dragons, massive beasts bred over centuries, some as old as the Conqueror himself. Vhagar, the largest dragon alive at the time, had once been ridden by Visenya Targaryen, and she was still fierce and powerful. Caraxes, the bloodworm, was ridden by Daemon Targaryen, a man whose reputation for brutality was matched only by his ambition. Sunfire, the golden dragon of Aegon II, was considered the most beautiful, but beauty meant nothing when the fire began to fly. The conflict escalated quickly. Supporters on both sides were assassinated. Strongholds were besieged. The riverlands burned. And then came the first true dragon-on-dragon duel, a clash over the skies of Storm's End that resulted in the death of Rhaenyra's son Lucerys and his dragon Arrax. That death shattered any hope for a peaceful resolution. Rhaenyra, overcome with grief, pushed for total war, and Daemon unleashed Caraxes with a fury that the realm had not seen since the conquest. The war became a spiral of vengeance, each side retaliating with increasing savagery. The turning point came at a place called the God's Eye, an immense lake in the Riverlands. There, Daemon Targaryen on Caraxes faced Aemon Targaryen, the younger son of Alicent, riding the ancient dragon Vhagar. It was a battle of legend. The two dragons collided in mid-air, tearing at each other with fangs and claws as they fell from the sky. Both riders died, and both dragons crashed into the lake, their bodies locked together in a death grip that would never be separated. The loss of a blow to the Greens, but the cost to the Blacks was equally devastating. Daemon was dead, and the Targaryen family lost one of its most capable warriors. But the war did not end there. Rhaenyra eventually took King's Landing, but her rule was short and plagued by paranoia. She lost the support of the people as the city starved and the treasury ran dry. Eventually, she was forced to flee, and when she returned to Dragonstone, hoping to regroup, she was betrayed. She found herself face to face with her half-brother, Aegon II, and the encounter ended with her death, her body consumed by Sunfire's fire. Aegon himself did not survive long, poisoned by his own supporters in the aftermath of the chaos. When the war finally ended, the Targaryen dynasty was still standing, but it was a shadow of what it had been. The dragons, once numbering in the dozens, had been reduced to a handful. Most were dead, killed in combat, or from wounds sustained during the conflict. The last few that survived were sickly and weak, and within a generation, they too had perished, leaving the Targaryens without the very creatures that had defined their power. This transformation was not immediate. It took decades for the last dragon to pass, but the loss was inevitable. The dance of the dragons had broken the family's momentum in a way that could never be repaired. The unified empire that had stretched from the Wall to the Summer Sea began to fracture. The lords of Westeros, having seen the Targaryens bleed and falter, grew bolder in their demands. Conflicts that had been suppressed by the threat of dragonfire began to surface again. The realm was still whole, but it was vulnerable in a way it had never been before. That is why the historians call this war the beginning of the end for the Dragon Lords. Not because the house fell immediately, but because the foundation had been cracked. The fear that had held the Seven Kingdoms together was gone. From that point forward, every Targaryen king had to rely on politics, alliances, and the strength of their armies. Tools that could be contested and challenged. The throne was no longer absolute, and as the centuries passed, the cracks only widened, leading eventually to the downfall of the dynasty itself. The Targaryens, once masters of the known world, became rulers of a fractured kingdom, always one misstep away from collapse. It is a story of hubris and consequence, of fire turned inward until nothing was left but ash, and much of what we know about this pivotal war comes from a book that George R.R. Martin wrote as a side project, a fictional history that gave us the details of the dance and the fall of the dragons. But why did he write it when he did? And what does it tell us about his process? That chapter of the story, The Procrastination of George R.R. Martin, reveals as much about the man as it does about the world he created. The Dance of the Dragons didn't just break the back of the Targaryen dynasty. It fractured the very story of their family. How do you capture a war that consumed a house from the inside out, where the truth was as much a weapon as dragonfire? The answer for George R.R. Martin was to step entirely outside the structure of his main novels. The story of this civil war and the centuries that led to it came to us not through the intimate eyes of a single character, but through the voice of a historian living centuries later, sifting through ashes and contradictory accounts. It arrived in a book published in 2018, a book that is as much a meditation on how history is written as it is a chronicle of the Targaryen reign. That book is a strange, magnificent artifact. It is not a novel. It is a fictional history written by an in-world maester named Archmaester Gildane. Martin built the entire metatext from the ground up. He invented the historians, the conflicting sources, the faded tapestries. The format is a brilliant escape hatch from the strict machinery of his own narrative. It allowed him to cover 3 centuries of Targaryen rule, without being bound by the limited point of view that defines. Instead of living inside a character's head for a single momentous event, you get the sweeping, bloody, contradictory overview of a whole dynasty. You get the raw lore, unpolished by a single protagonist's bias. But wait, the bias is still there. It is just buried deeper in the unreliable narrator who compiled the text. The Maester is not omniscient. He is looking back through fog. This brings us to the delicious, deeply frustrating irony of its existence. Martin wrote while millions of readers were, and still are, waiting for him to finish. He has been open about his struggle. The main narrative had become a Gordian knot of characters and plots, demanding immense focus. And in the meantime, he dove headfirst into the expansive playground of it is a move that perfectly encapsulates his creative drive. He is an architect of worlds, not merely the teller of a single story, building out the history of the Targaryen reign. Filling in the blanks of this massive family tree, it is an obsession, a genuine love of the fake history itself. But for the reader, it is a bittersweet gesture. We get this incredible, detailed map of the past, a prequel that allows to exist, while the main timeline waits in limbo. It is the ultimate act of creative procrastination, a detour that became its own destination, a massive wall of text built on the road to the main event. Yet it is this very structure, this fictional history format, that creates the specific kind of tension that defines the television adaptation. Because it's written as a contested history, every event is presented with a grain of salt. Septon Eustace says one thing, a pious and sanitized version of events. Mushroom the Court Fool says another, a crude and scandalous alternative. The maesters at the Citadel have their own political loyalties. The text constantly reminds you that history is written by the victors, or at least by the survivors who know how to write. When you adapt this for television, you are forced to make a choice. The showrunners have to pick a lane. They have to decide which version of reality is unfolding on screen, or do they? The best moments in feel haunted by the ghosts of these conflicting accounts. A character will act in a certain way, and the careful viewer knows that another account from the book says the exact opposite was their motivation. This creates a fascinating depth. The show is not a straightforward adaptation of a single story. It is an adaptation of a contested history. It is the Rashomon effect applied to Dragonfire and courtly intrigue. Every scene sits on a foundation of potential lies and conflicting legacies. It asks not just what happened, but whether the truth was ever really possible to know. That this fight over a contested history, this brutal war over the succession of a crown, is not merely a product of Martin's imagination. It has the heavy weight of real flesh and blood behind it. The Dance of the Dragons is a mirror held up to a grim chapter of English history, a time when the crown sat on a knife's edge between a woman and a man, plunging a kingdom into chaos and darkness. It is there, in the bitter winter of the 12th century, that the ghost of Rhaenyra Targaryen first walked the earth. In our next chapter, we will step out of Westeros and into the crown of King Stephen to uncover the brutal historical foundations of this conflict. In a journey we call the real history of the Anarchy. The previous chapter ended with George R.R. Martin sitting in his chair, writing history that never happened, putting off the book we all actually want, and telling himself it was all research. And in a strange way, he was right, because the Dance of the Dragons, the war that destroyed the Targaryen dynasty from within, did not come from nowhere. It came from the pages of English history, from a conflict so brutal and so forgotten that most people call it by a name that sounds like a placeholder, the Anarchy. The Anarchy. It sounds like a chapter heading in a textbook, something you skip past on the way to the Tudors. But this was a civil war that tore through England for nearly 2 decades, from 1135 to 1153, and it was fought over a crown. At its centre stood a woman named Matilda, or Maud, depending on which historian you read. She was the daughter of King Henry I, the youngest son of William the Conqueror. Henry had no surviving legitimate sons. His only male heir, a boy named William Adelin, had died in a shipwreck off the coast of Normandy in 1120. That shipwreck, the White Ship disaster, is one of those moments that changes the course of history. Because of a single drunken mistake, the crew and passengers had been drinking. The ship hit a rock, and the heir to the throne drowned. The kingdom was left with a question: Who rules when a king has no son? Henry I decided that questions should be answered by his daughter. He made his barons swear oaths, multiple times, that they would accept Matilda as his successor, and when Henry died in 1135, the barons broke those oaths almost immediately. They crowned Henry's nephew, Stephen of Blois, instead. Stephen was a man, and that was enough. The oaths were parchment, the promises were wind, but a man on a throne was a fact, and so the war began. Now if that sounds familiar, it should. That is the exact skeleton of the Dance of the Dragons. King Viserys I names his daughter Rhaenyra as his heir. The lords of Westeros swear oaths to her, and then the moment Viserys dies, they crown her half-brother Aegon II instead. The White Ship disaster in our world becomes the death of Viserys' sons by his first wife, or more precisely, the death of the male heir that leaves the succession uncertain. In Westeros, that heir is a son named Balon who dies in infancy. In England, it was William Adelin who drowned. Both events created a vacancy that patriarchal tradition rushed to fill. But the parallels run deeper than the succession crisis itself. Matilda and Rhaenyra both faced a world that simply could not imagine a queen regnant. Matilda was not passive. She was imperious, proud and ruthless when she needed to be. She led armies, she besieged castles. She escaped from a castle in the snow, dressed in white to blend in with the landscape. She was not a victim. Yet the chroniclers of the time, almost all of them men writing for a male audience, described her as arrogant, unwomanly and haughty. When she marched on London in 1141, she demanded taxes from the citizens and refused to negotiate. The city rose against her and she fled. The same chroniclers who praised Stephen's weakness. He was captured in battle. He lost key strongholds, called Matilda's strength a flaw. She was supposed to be gentle. She was supposed to defer. She was a woman, and that was the only thing that mattered. Rhaenyra suffers the same fate in the histories written by maesters in Westeros. The official accounts of the Dance of the Dragons were compiled under the reign of Aegon III, Rhaenyra's own son, and even then, the narrative tilted against her. She is called Maegor with teats, a cruel and paranoid ruler. She is blamed for the deaths of her own children. The propaganda machine of the Greens, the faction supporting Aegon II, painted her as a foreigner, a whore, a woman unfit to rule. And the reality of her reign, the fact that she was the rightful heir by her father's decree, gets buried under the weight of 1,000 years of tradition. Both Matilda and Rhaenyra fought not just for a throne, but for the right to be seen as legitimate in a world that denied their very existence as rulers. And the wars themselves were not chivalrous. They were not battles of glorious knights meeting on a field. The Anarchy was a war of sieges, of famine, of castles changing hands so often that the chroniclers lost count. Stephen's forces burned crops, destroyed villages, and starved entire regions. Matilda's half-brother, Robert of Gloucester, was captured and exchanged for a captured king. The war dragged on so long that the people began to say, Christ and his saints slept. The kingdom descended into a private war of lords settling scores, each castle a fortress of petty tyranny. Soldiers roamed the countryside, taking what they wanted. The law vanished. And that is exactly what George R.R. Martin wanted to capture in the Riverlands during the War of the Five Kings. He has said that the Anarchy and its smaller-scale brutality gave him the texture of Westeros at war. Not grand battles, but a grinding, miserable conflict that eats the land alive. The White Ship disaster is a perfect analogue for the chaos that follows when the line of succession snaps. In our world, that shipwreck led to 19 years of war. In Westeros, the death of Viserys' sons, combined with the lack of a clear precedent, led to the dance. But the real tragedy is that both wars could have been avoided if the barons had kept their oaths. If the lords of Westeros had honoured Viserys' wish, millions would not have died. But oaths are cheap, and tradition is heavy, and the patriarchy does not break easily. Matilda never became queen in her own right. She fought, she won, she lost, and in the end she made a deal. Stephen kept the throne for his lifetime, but Matilda's son, Henry Plantagenet, would succeed him. That son became Henry II, one of England's greatest medieval kings. Matilda lived to see her son crowned, and she spent her final years as a dowager queen in Normandy, wielding influence from the shadows. Rhaenyra's story ended differently. She took the throne, but only briefly. Her own half-brother Aegon II had her fed to his dragon, Sunfire, in front of a crowd. She died screaming, and her body was never given proper burial. But her son, Aegon III, did become king. Both women lost the war in their own lifetimes, but their bloodlines won in the end. That is the brutal paradox of medieval civil wars. They are fought by men for causes they barely understand, but the women at the centre are remembered as either villains or victims, never as queens. Matilda and Rhaenyra are mirrors across 1,000 years, separated by language and geography, but united by a struggle that still echoes today. The Anarchy is not a footnote in English history. It is the living skeleton of everything that makes the Dance of the Dragons feel so real, so painful, so human. And that reality, the blood and the betrayal, and the quiet horror of watching a kingdom tear itself apart over a throne. That is what Martin borrowed most of all. He did not just copy the names, he copied the feeling that the people in charge are not heroes. They are just people, flawed and desperate, making mistakes that kill thousands. The Anarchy did not end with a bang. It ended with a treaty and a handshake. And then everyone went home to count the dead. The dance ended with a boy king and a realm in ashes. And that is the brutal truth of history, both real and imagined. There is no happy ending. There is only survival. Next, we will turn to the roses themselves. The Wars of the Roses, the other great English civil war that Martin used as a blueprint, and the blood-soaked dinners and massacres that inspired the Red Wedding. Because reality, as it turns out, is always darker than fiction. We've just explored how the Dance of the Dragons mirrors the 12th century Anarchy, that bitter struggle between Empress Matilda and Stephen of Blois. But if you look closer, the blood and fire of Westeros don't stop at English borders. The main series was itself a tapestry woven from the Wars of the Roses. The White Rose of York versus the Red Rose of Lancaster, a conflict that tore medieval England apart for more than 30 years. George R.R. Martin took that struggle and poured it into the rivalry between Stark and Lannister. The North, the cold honour of the Starks, echoes the Yorkist claim. The golden scheming of the Lannisters mirrors the Lancastrian court. But Martin didn't stop at the battlefield. He reached deeper into history, into the darkest corners of Scottish tradition, to give us one of the most shocking moments in television. The Red Wedding. The Red Wedding is fictional, but its roots are terrifyingly real. Two events in particular stand out: the Black Dinner of 1440 and the Massacre of Glencoe in 1692. The Black Dinner took place in Edinburgh Castle. The young Earl of Douglas was invited to a feast by the young King James II of Scotland. The meal was lavish, the wine flowed freely. Then, as the evening reached its climax, a black bull's head, the symbol of execution, was brought to the table. The Earl knew what it meant. He and his brother were dragged outside, given a mock trial, and beheaded. The king, only a boy himself, had been manipulated by his regents, who saw the Douglas as a threat. The betrayal at a banquet, under the guise of hospitality, is the exact same cruelty at the Twins in the Riverlands. The second inspiration, the Massacre of Glencoe, is even more chilling. In 1692, soldiers of the Campbell clan, who had been housed and fed by the MacDonald clan of Glencoe for nearly 2 weeks, turned on their hosts in the dead of night. They slaughtered men, women, and children under the code of Highland hospitality. The Campbells had been ordered to destroy the MacDonalds for failing to pledge allegiance to the king. The massacre took place on February 13th, and to this day it remains a scar on Scottish history. These are not just grim curiosities, they are the very skeleton of the Red Wedding. The Lannisters and Freys, like the Campbells and the young king's regents, used the safety of a feast to commit murder. And why does all this matter for? Because when a fantasy world is built on real-world brutality, it gains a gravity that no amount of special effects can replicate. The dragons, the magic, the ancient Valyrian steel, all of that becomes believable when the violence feels grounded in our own past. The Dance of the Dragons is not just a story of rival claimants. It is a story of how families betray each other, how power corrupts the bonds of blood, how a feast can become a massacre. The evolution of political betrayal from the Scottish Highlands to the halls of the Red Keep is a direct line. In the Highlands, a chieftain might break the sacred law of hospitality because of orders from a distant king. In Westeros, Lord Walder Frey broke that same law because he could gain power and favour. In the same seeds of treachery being planted, the court of Viserys I is full of whispered alliances, secret pacts, and knives hidden under silks. The Blacks and Greens will not just fight on Dragonback, they will scheme, lie, and break every promise they have made. The real-world brutality that inspired the Red Wedding is the same cruelty that will eventually tear the Targaryen dynasty apart. Think about the Wars of the Roses again. That conflict ended with Henry Tudor seizing the throne and marrying Elizabeth of York, uniting the red and white roses under a single symbol. Westeros tries the same with the marriage of Cersei and Robert Baratheon, but the piece is just a canvas. In the unity of the Targaryen dynasty is already fraying. Viserys loves his daughter, but his second wife's family wants a king. The English Anarchy gave us the White Ship disaster, which drowned the heir to the throne and threw the kingdom into chaos. Deaths of heirs and betrayals in the name of succession will mount until the very idea of a united throne becomes a lie. And now we move closer to that breaking point. The next chapter, The Death of the Good King, will show us exactly how the man who held the realm together for so long finally falls. But before that, we need to understand what makes a good king in this world, and what happens when the hand that holds the sword grows old. The seeds of the dance are already sprouting, and we will watch them bloom into fire. The Black Dinner of 1440 and the massacre of Glencoe that we talked about in the last chapter. Those were real, bloody moments where trust was broken over a meal or in the dead of night. But in the world of Westeros, the single greatest betrayal of trust didn't happen at a feast or in a mountain pass. It happened in the quiet of a sick room, around a bed where a king lay dying, and that betrayal set the stage for a war that would tear apart a dynasty, destroy nearly every dragon in existence, and leave the Iron Throne stained with the blood of children. That war was the Dance of the Dragons, and it began not with a battle, but with the death of the good king. King Viserys, the first Targaryen, is remembered as a man of peace. He inherited a realm that had been united by his grandfather, Jaehaerys the Conciliator, who ruled for 55 years of unprecedented stability. Viserys continued that tradition. He held tournaments, he presided over councils, he kept the peace between the great houses. He was well liked, even loved by the small folk and the lords alike. But peace in a feudal monarchy is always precarious, because it rests on the health of a single man, and Viserys, for all his kindness, had a fatal flaw that no amount of goodwill could fix. He could not bear to make a choice that would hurt the people he loved. When his first wife, Aemma Arryn, died in childbirth along with their son, Viserys was left with only a daughter, Rhaenyra. He adored her. She was his only surviving child, and he saw in her the same fire and intelligence that had made the Targaryens great. So he named her his heir. He had the lords of the realm swear oaths to her. He believed that love and legacy could overcome tradition. His daughter would sit the throne after him and the realm would accept her because he willed it. But Viserys made a second choice that undermined everything. He remarried. He took Alicent Hightower as his queen, the daughter of his hand, Otto Hightower, and in time Alicent gave him sons. Suddenly, the succession was no longer a simple matter. The precedent of the realm, going back thousands of years, said that a son came before a daughter. The lords who had sworn to Rhaenyra began to whisper that perhaps the oaths were forced, perhaps they could be broken. Perhaps the king would change his mind. Viserys never changed his mind. He loved Rhaenyra too much, and he loved his sons too much to strip them of their status. So he did what he always did. He tried to have it both ways. He kept Rhaenyra as his heir, but he raised Alicent's children as princes. He allowed the factions to form around him. The Blacks loyal to Rhaenyra, the Greens loyal to Alicent and her son Aegon. And he pretended that his will alone could keep them from each other's throats. That was the vacuum, the king's declining health. For years, Viserys suffered from a wasting illness. He lost fingers, he lost teeth, he lost his sight in one eye. He became a ghost of a man, shuffling through the Red Keep in pain. But he refused to name a successor other than Rhaenyra. He also refused to disinherit Aegon. He wanted peace, but peace required a clear line, and he could not draw one. So the realm held its breath, waiting for the moment the throne would become empty. And when that moment came, it was not a debate that broke the peace. It was a seizure of power. The specific moment the succession crisis shifted from a political debate to an armed conflict was not the day Viserys died. It was the day after, when the Greens moved in secret. The king drew his final breath in the early hours of the morning, attended only by his wife Alicent, his hand Otto, and a few masters. They did not announce his death. Instead, they concealed his body, wrapped him in furs, and kept the door shut. They sent riders to summon the loyalists of the Green faction. And while Rhaenyra was still at Dragonstone, believing her father was alive, the Greens crowned Aegon the second in the Dragon Pit, with the Iron Throne waning empty in the Great Hall. That was the moment when words became swords, when oaths became treason, when the kingdom split in two. In the Red Keep, chaos reigned beneath a thin veneer of order. Servants whispered. Guards changed shifts uneasily. The small council meeting that morning was a farce of grief and ambition. Otto Hightower spoke of duty. Alicent wept, though her tears were as much for the weight she now carried as for her dead husband. Aegon himself was reluctant, dragged from his chambers and dressed in his father's armour, but his mother's will was iron. She had spent years preparing for this. She knew that if the Greens did not act first, the Blacks would, and Rhaenyra would take the throne with fire and blood. So they acted, and in acting, they turned a succession dispute into a civil war. Viserys' fatal flaw was not that he chose Rhaenyra, and it was not that he married Alicent. It was that he refused to see the consequences of his own choices. He wanted to be loved by everyone, and so he gave everyone reason to think they might win. He left no clear path. He left a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum, especially in a castle full of dragons. The moment his heart stopped, the realm had no king, no clear heir, and two armies already forming in the shadows. The debate was over. The only question left was which side would draw first blood, and that is the story we will step into next. The moment when friends and family, brothers and sisters, husbands and wives, had to choose, the Blacks or the Greens, Rhaenyra or Aegon. The lines were drawn not in ink, but in dragonfire. The choosing of sides was about to begin. The realm held its breath the moment King Viserys I closed his eyes for the last time. For years, the succession had been a quiet storm, a tension simmering beneath the feasts and the tourneys, and the polite smiles in the Red Keep. Viserys had spent his reign trying to hold two irreconcilable truths together: that his daughter Rhaenyra was his chosen heir, and that his son Aegon, born of his second wife Alicent Hightower, commanded the allegiance of a powerful faction at court. But a king's word is only law as long as he lives to enforce it. The moment the breath left his body, that law became a ghost, and in the silence of that death chamber, the succession crisis stopped being a debate and became a war waiting for a single spark. That spark came in the form of a coronation, not Rhaenyra's. She was far away on Dragonstone, expecting word of her father's passing and preparing to claim what was hers by decree. Instead, the Green faction moved with ruthless speed. They knew that the throne could not stay empty. Every hour without a king was an invitation for chaos, for rival lords to gather their banners, for the realm to fracture. So within a day of Viserys' death, They crowned Aegon II in the dragon pit, before the eyes of the small folk, with the high septon anointing his brow with oils. The bells of the great sept of Baelor rang out across King's Landing, and the message was clear. The son sits the Iron Throne, not the daughter. That single ceremony was more than a political maneuver. It was a declaration of war. It drew a line across the map of Westeros, dividing families, splitting loyalties, and forcing every lord, every knight, every commoner to choose a side. There was no middle ground. You were either a black or a green, and behind those two colours lay two entirely different philosophies of rule. Two visions of what the realm should be. Let us define them clearly, because the names themselves carry the weight of the conflict. The Blacks were Rhaenyra's faction. Their name came from the colours her father, King Viserys, had chosen for his own court, the deep black of the Targaryen banners, the black of dragon scales and mourning silk. But more than a colour, the black stood for a principle. The king's word is absolute. Viserys had named Rhaenyra his heir when she was only 7 years old. He had made the lords of the realm swear oaths to her, one by one, in the great hall of the Red Keep. He had reaffirmed that choice time and again, even as his sons were born, even as Alicent whispered in his ear. For the Blacks, legitimacy came from the spoken decree of the monarch, the king's will, not tradition, not custom, not the ancient laws of the Andals. That was the foundation of Rhaenyra's claim. On the other side stood the Greens. Their name came from the emerald silks that Queen Alicent wore at the great tourney celebrating the birth of her first son, Aegon. The Greens argued that the king's decree had been overridden by a more fundamental law. The law of the Andals, the tradition of male preference primogeniture that had governed every great house in Westeros for thousands of years. A daughter could inherit only if there was no son, and there was a son, a healthy living son, a boy who had been raised in the light of the faith, who embodied the ideal of a king. For the Greens, it was not about disloyalty to Viserys. It was about protecting the realm from the chaos that would follow if the oldest traditions were discarded. A woman on the Iron Throne, they argued, would invite challenges from every ambitious lord. A woman would weaken the dynasty. A woman, above all, would defy the will of the gods as interpreted by the faith. So the two camps hardened into something more than factions. They became identities. The Blacks were the progressives, the king's men, the dragon riders, who believed in Targaryen exceptionalism. The Greens were the traditionalists, the faithful, the upholders of Andal custom. And between them stood families torn apart. Consider the House of the Strongs. Arwen Strong, the father of Rhaenyra's sons, had been a Black through and through, but his own father, Lord Lionel Strong, served as hand of the king to Viserys and tried to remain neutral. And what of the Velaryons? The Sea Snake, Lord Corlys Velaryon, was Rhaenyra's father-in-law, but his wife, Princess Rhaenys, had her own claim to the throne and had been passed over at the Great Council years before. She could have been queen. Now she had to decide whether to support the woman who had taken what was rightfully hers, or to side with the Greens out of spite or pragmatism. Even the small folk of King's Landing were caught in the middle. Or to pick a colour, to wear a badge, to whisper a name in taverns where the wrong word could mean a knife in the dark, and all of it, the oaths, the traditions, the ancient grudges, the love and the hatred, crystallized around that coronation. The ceremony itself was a masterwork of theatrical legitimacy. Aegon II wore the crown of Aegon the Conqueror. He sat upon the Iron Throne, and though the swords bit into his palms and drew blood, he did not flinch. The maesters wrote that the small folk cheered, but they also wrote that many wept, because they knew what was coming. A dragon cannot have two heads. The realm cannot have two kings. And so, from the moment the crown was placed on Aegon's brow, the firestorm began. But the dance of the dragons did not start in the flame and the fury of battle. It started in the silence of a deathbed, in the clink of green silk in a secret council, in the bells of a coronation that rang out like a challenge. And it started in the hearts of families who had to look at one another across the dinner table and ask, "Are you a black or are you a green?" That question would echo through every castle, every keep, every battlefield, and it would never be answered without blood. Now, one of the most pivotal figures in this coming storm was a man who held no crown, but who commanded the largest fleet in the known world. A man who had sailed to the farthest edges of the map and brought back treasures beyond count. A man whose name was whispered with awe and envy, and whose allegiance could tip the scales of the war. But his story is not about choosing a colour. It is about something far older, far stranger, and far more dangerous. A story of the sea, of lost cities, and of a legacy that would outlast the dragons themselves. That story is waiting for us, just over the horizon. We've seen the factions form, the lines drawn between the blacks and the greens. But behind that political chessboard stands a man who doesn't need to choose sides, because he owns the game itself, Lord Corlys Velaryon, the Sea Snake. And to understand why his allegiance is the most coveted prize in the coming war, you have to understand how he built an empire that rivals even the Iron Bank. Corlys Velaryon is not just the wealthiest man in the Seven Kingdoms. He is the wealthiest man who has ever lived in the world of ice and fire. His fortune is not built on gold mines or taxes, but on something far more ancient, the sea. And the sea rewards those who dare to chart its unknown depths. Before Corlys, House Velaryon was already old as the Targaryens themselves, sharing the same bloodline from Old Valyria, but they were not rich. They were a proud house with a fleet, but their coffers were modest. That changed when Corlys took command. He earned his nickname the Sea Snake, not from any serpent of the ocean, but from his flagship, the Sea Snake, and from his 9 legendary voyages. These were not simple trading runs. They were expeditions that pushed beyond the known maps of the world, beyond the Summer Sea, beyond the Jade Gates, into waters where no Westerosi ship had ever sailed and returned. On his first voyage, he travelled to the Far East, to the city of Karth, and brought back silks and spices that made his merchants wealthy overnight. But he didn't stop there. He ventured to the legendary city of Ashai, where the shadows lie, and returned with dragonglass, rare metals, and knowledge that could not be bought. With each voyage, he mapped new routes, established trade agreements with cities that had never heard of Westeros, and filled his holds with treasures that made the Lannisters look like provincial lords. By the time he completed his 9th voyage, Corlys had circumnavigated the continent of Essos, something no one before him had ever accomplished. He discovered the source of the River Rhoyne. He glimpsed the ruins of Valyria from a distance, and he brought back enough wealth to make House Velaryon the richest in the realm, surpassing even the Hightowers and the Lannisters combined. But wealth alone does not make a man dangerous. What makes Corlys Velaryon so vital and so perilous to the Targaryen dynasty is that he controls the sea. King's Landing is a port city. Trade flows through the Gullet, the narrow sea between Dragonstone and the mainland. Without the Velaryon fleet, the crown cannot protect its shores, cannot collect its tariffs, cannot even feed its population if a blockade is laid. And Corlys commands not just ships, but the loyalty of every sailor from Driftmark to the Stepstones. He is in effect the admiral of the realm. Yet there is a deeper tension beneath this alliance. House Velaryon and House Targaryen share the blood of Old Valyria. They are both dragon lords in ancestry. Though only the Targaryens retained the dragons after the Doom, that shared heritage binds them, but it also creates a dangerous proximity. The Velaryons have always served as the Targaryens' closest kin, intermarrying for generations. Corlys himself married Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was. But that very closeness means the Velaryons understand the Targaryen lineage better than anyone. They know the prophecies, the traditions, the blood purity laws, and they have their own ambitions. The distinction between having the blood of Old Valyria and the ability to ride dragons is one of the most misunderstood aspects of this world. Not every Targaryen can bond with a dragon. Some are immune to the heat, some are not. Some are born with the gift, some are not. The Velaryons, for all their ancient lineage, are not dragon riders by birth. They are seafarers, not sky lords. But Corlys's children, Laenor and Laena, both became dragon riders because their mother was a Targaryen. That mix of blood and power makes the Velaryons the perfect bridge between the old world and the new. They have the prestige of Valyria without the full dependency on dragons. And that independence is what makes them so unpredictable. When the dance of the dragons finally ignites, the sea snake will not simply throw his support behind Rhaenyra or Aegon the Send. He will negotiate. He will demand terms. Because he knows that whoever controls the sea controls the supply lines, and whoever controls the supply lines wins the war. His fleet is the silent backbone of the realm, and Corlys Velaryon is the man who can tighten that backbone into a noose. But even as we speak of seas and ships, there is another force that moves beneath the surface, a monopoly that no ship can challenge: fire, and the Targaryens hold the only source of that power. This brings us to the next chapter, a look at dragons not as beasts of war, but as a strategic resource that the crown guards jealously. We call it the monopoly on fire, and it will reveal why the Targaryens could never truly share the sky with anyone else, not even their oldest allies. Lord Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake, had spent a lifetime sailing to the farthest corners of the known world. He had returned from his 9 voyages with enough wealth to rival the Lannisters, enough exotic spices to flavour 1,000 feasts, and enough tales of distant lands to fill the libraries of Oldtown. But for all his treasure and all his influence, there was one thing Corlys could never bring back to Westeros. One power that no fleet of ships, no hoard of gold, no alliance of trade could ever replicate, and that power was fire. The Targaryens held a monopoly on fire, not the hearth fire that warms a cottage, nor the forge fire that shapes a sword, but the living, breathing, world-ending fire that comes from a dragon's throat. In a medieval society, where the mightiest army marches on foot, and the strongest castle is a pile of stone, a dragon is not merely a weapon. It is a deterrent so absolute that it warps the very concept of warfare. Think of it as the nuclear option of Westeros, but one that breathes and hunts and has a will of its own. No other house, no rival kingdom, no rebellious lord can match it. The Targaryens did not conquer the 7 kingdoms through superior numbers or better steel. They conquered because they possessed something no one else could even threaten to possess. That exclusivity was not an accident. It was engineered through centuries of deliberate choice, a bloodline guarded as fiercely as the dragons themselves. The internal politics of dragon bonding were as complex and as brutal as any succession crisis. Not every Targaryen could claim a dragon. The bond was not hereditary in the way a title is passed from father to son. It demanded something deeper, something almost mystical. A dragon chooses its rider, but the blood of old Valyria is the key that unlocks the door. Even then, many Targaryens failed. Some were burned, some were eaten, some simply never found the connection. Those who succeeded became the elite within an already elite family. The dragon riders were the true power behind the throne, and the struggle to become one drove the internal politics of the dynasty for generations. This exclusivity had a profound effect on how the Targaryens ruled. They did not need to maintain a massive standing army. They did not need to build fortifications that could withstand a siege from a neighbouring kingdom. Why waste gold on walls when you can fly over them? The presence of dragons fundamentally changed the nature of medieval warfare and castle sieges. A castle, no matter how high its walls, how thick its gates, how deep its moat, becomes a death trap when a dragon circles overhead. Traditional siege tactics collapse. You cannot starve out an enemy who can burn your supply lines from the sky. You cannot undermine a wall when the ground above is drenched in liquid flame. And you certainly cannot man the battlements when the air itself turns to a furnace. The dragon is not just a weapon. It is a complete redefinition of the battlefield. The only defense against a dragon is another dragon, and that is a fact that made the Targaryens both terrifying and vulnerable. Now consider the terrifying reality of being a common soldier in a war between dragon riders. You have trained for years with a pike or a sword. You understand the rhythm of a shield wall, the timing of an arrow volley, the value of holding a line, but none of that training prepares you for the shadow that falls across the field, for the roar that shakes the ground beneath your feet, for the wave of heat that announces death before you even see the source. You look up and you see a creature the size of a keeps, its scales gleaming like iron, its eyes burning with an intelligence that recognizes you as prey. There is no formation that can protect you, no commander's order that will save you. You are a speck of dust in a hurricane. The dragon passes overhead, and a line of fire carves through the ranks. Your comrades become screaming torches. The stench of melted armor and burned flesh fills your lungs, and you know, with a certainty that breaks your mind, that there is nothing you can do. You cannot fight. You cannot run fast enough. You can only pray that the dragon does not turn back. That was the fear the Targaryens wielded. It was the foundation of their 300-year rule, and it was the poison that would eventually destroy them. Because when a monopoly on fire is broken, when two dragon riders face each other in the sky, the whole world becomes a battlefield, and the common soldier, the farmer forced into a levy, the knight who only wanted glory, becomes the collateral damage of a war between demigods. The Dance of the Dragons was not just a civil war. It was the unleashing of a force that had been held in check for centuries, and it began with a question that had no answer. Who gets to ride the dragon? The bloodline's exclusivity, the politics of bonding, the sheer terror of the weapon, all of it converges on that single point. And in the next chapter, we will look at what made those dragons tick, the biology and the science behind the fire, and how a creature that never stops growing can even exist in a world of stone and steel. The Targaryen monopoly on fire was never a simple thing. It was bound by blood, yes, bound by lineage. But the creatures themselves, the dragons, they obeyed a set of biological rules, far stranger, far more terrifying than simple family inheritance. They are obligate carnivores. This is not a preference. It is a biological imperative. The metabolic furnace that produces dragon flame is an immense engine. It demands constant fuel, raw, living fuel. A grounded dragon is a liability. A hungry dragon is a catastrophe waiting for an excuse to happen, and they never stop growing. Unlike a man, a wolf, or a horse, a dragon has no final form. As long as it breathes, it grows. The younger dragons are dangerous. The old ones, they are apocalypses waiting in the shadow of the clouds. This is the terrifying equation. The correlation between a dragon's age, its size, and its destructive potential is brutally direct. A hatchling can burn a flock of sheep. A dragon like Vargar, alive during the conquest, can burn a kingdom. Vargar is not just old. She is a living monument to a different age. An age when dragons were not kept in stables, but roamed the earth as the unchallenged apex of a broken world. Her size is not just a curiosity. It is a direct reading of her capacity for annihilation. Every year of her life is an increase in power that cannot be negotiated with. But here is where the pristine biology gets muddied by the messiness of civilization. The Targaryens brought their dragons to King's Landing. They built the Dragon Pit, a great domed prison meant to house the beasts that made them gods. But a dragon is not a horse. It is not a castle guard. It is a force of nature. Confining it in a stone cage in the middle of a city, feeding it butchered meat, instead of letting it hunt across entire continents, the effect was profound. The later generations of dragons raised in the Dragon Pit were shadows of their ancestors. They were smaller, their flames were weaker, their instincts were dulled, their growth was stunted, not by bad breeding, but by the environment itself. The pit was a cage, and cages have a way of diminishing whatever is kept inside them. The later Targaryens did not have Balerion. They had the pale echoes of his kind, creatures that were still powerful, yes, but a far cry from the world shakers of the old age. The environment of the Dragon Pit physically crippled their potential. It was an evolutionary dead end written into the architecture of the city, an environmental disaster created by the very family that relied on their power. And this brings us to the deepest mystery, the bond between a rider and a dragon. What is it, really? We watch it on screen. The eyes meet, the fire breathes, the bond is forged. But is it merely training? Is it a psychic connection? A telepathic frequency only the Blood of Old Valyria can tune into? A shared song that only a rider can hear? Or is it something far darker? Blood magic, a spell of binding cast by the ancient dragon lords of the Freehold, so deeply woven into the Targaryen line that it is mistaken for simple family loyalty. A dragon does not respond to a whip, it responds to blood. When a rider dies, the dragon feels it across any distance. They go mad with grief. They refuse all other masters. This suggests a bond that is not friendship, but a magical contract written in fire and blood, a leash that only pure Valyrian blood can hold. And if the blood fades, if the magic weakens from too many marriages outside the line, the leash begins to fray. The Targaryens kept their bloodline pure for a reason. Incest was not just a habit of absolute power, it was a desperate mechanism to keep the dragon magic strong. A rider who is too diluted, too far from the heart of the Freehold, is a rider who cannot bond. The magic is in the blood, and the blood must remain strong. This is the system they built, a house of cards balanced on the biology of monsters they could not fully control, the fragile magic of the bond, the declining strength of the pit dragons, the massive, aging, terrifying beasts like Vargar, growing more powerful with every passing year, ridden by a new generation who did not understand the cost of the leash. The science of dragons is a story of power, but it is also a story of decay, a ticking clock that no one in the Red Keep seemed to hear, a clock built from the blood of dead cities, the hunger of creatures that should never have been tamed. And the moment that clock finally strikes, the moment the House of Cards begins to collapse, that is the beginning of the end. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. We ended the last chapter with a biological truth that shaped the entire history of this world. Dragons never stop growing, and the oldest among them are essentially living weapons of mass destruction. Vargar, for example, by the time of the Dance of the Dragons, was large enough to swallow a horse whole. Her flames could melt stone. Her wings could blot out the sun over an entire city. Now take that physical truth and apply it to a civil war. A war where brother fights sister, where cousins burn each other alive. What happens when these living nuclear deterrents are deployed not against a foreign enemy, but against each other? You get the extinction of a species. The long-term consequences of the Dance of the Dragons are still being felt 200 years later, when a girl named Daenerys hatches 3 petrified eggs. But in the immediate aftermath of the war, the world changed forever. The war was a brutal affair, but its most defining feature was the sheer scale of dragon-on-dragon violence. Dragons fought dragons. They fought in the skies above Storm's End, above the God's Eye, and within the very walls of the Dragon Pit in King's Landing. The Dragon Pit, that great domed structure designed to house the Targaryen dragons, became their tomb. Rhaenyra's faction incited the small folk of King's Landing to rise up against the dragons trapped inside. And they did. They swarmed the pit with spears, crossbows, and torches. They killed the young dragons. Syrax, a formidable but young dragon, was pulled down by a mob. The dragons, meant to be the symbols of Targaryen supremacy, died screaming in a pit of their own capital city, killed by the subjects they were meant to rule over. Then, at the God's Eye, Daemon Targaryen and Aemon Targaryen fought one of the most epic duels in the history of Westeros. Daemon on Caraxes, the Bloodworm, and Aemond on Vargar. The two of them fell from the sky into the lake below, killing both riders and both dragons. The war saw the death of nearly every single dragon in Westeros. The few that survived were sickly, stunted, or wild. They did not survive long. By the time the war officially ended, The Targaryen monopoly on fire was shattered. The dragons were gone. And this leads us to the most profound shift in the history of Westeros, the transformation of House Targaryen from a magical superpower into a standard, mundane feudal monarchy. Think about what this meant. For 300 years, the Targaryens were not just kings, they were closer to gods. They had the power to end a rebellion before it began. They had the power to enforce peace across an entire continent. Aegon the Conqueror united the Seven Kingdoms because no army could stand against him. Maegor the Cruel put down the Faith Militant because he could burn their holy sites to the ground. Without dragons, the Targaryens were just another noble family. A noble family with a complicated history and a tendency for civil war, but just a family. They had the Iron Throne, but it was just a chair. They had the crown, but it was just metal. They no longer had the absolute overwhelming force required to keep the realm united. This is the tragic irony at the heart of House Targaryen. They destroyed their own greatest source of strength. The family that taught the world to fear dragons became the family that killed them all. They were so busy fighting each other for a throne made of swords that they forgot the throne itself was made of swords forged by dragonfire. It was a self-inflicted wound that would never fully heal. The Dance of the Dragons was the beginning of the end for the dynasty. The seeds of Robert's rebellion, of the Mad King, of the fall of the Targaryens, were all planted in the ash of the dragon pit. Every rebellion after the dance was possible only because the dragons were dead. The Blackfire rebellions, the defiance of Duskendale, Robert's own rebellion. None of them would have succeeded if there was even a single adult dragon in the royal stables. But there wasn't. There were only storybooks and songs about the dragons of old. Songs about Vargar and Balerion, sung by bards who had never seen a real dragon, who could not possibly imagine the sound of their wings, which makes one wonder. How did a family, blessed with the most incredible power the world has ever seen, manage to throw it all away? It requires us to look not at the war itself, but at the peace that came before it. The peace and the man who tried so hard to preserve it that he broke it completely. We must examine the reign of the good king, Viserys I. His story is one of the most tragic in all of Westerosi history. Up next, we dedicate an entire chapter to him, to the decisions he made, and to the throne that slowly crushed him. It is called The Burden of Viserys I, and it explains exactly how a family of dragon lords, blessed with fire-made flesh, managed to forget how terrifying they truly were. The end of House Targaryen's absolute power begins not with a dragon's roar, but with the exhausted breath of a man struggling to hold his family together. The beginning of the end, the very extinction of the dragons we discussed last, was set in commotion not by a tyrant, but by a king who wanted nothing more than to be loved. Viserys I is remembered in the histories as the good king, but that goodness was a heavy burden, a crown woven from compromise and grief. He was a man who inherited a peaceful realm at its zenith and dedicated his life to keeping it intact. He struggled every day to maintain that peace, believing that if he just loved deeply enough and ruled fairly enough, the fractures in his house would heal on their own. He threw great tournaments. He consulted his council endlessly, but a king cannot negotiate away a family curse. He could not sit on the Iron Throne and simply wish away the conflict that was breeding in his very own bloodline. His deep dive into the character of a good ruler was ultimately a deep dive into his own inability to rule. The foundation of his entire reign and his entire sorrow was the death of his first wife, Aemma Arryn. Aemma was his rock, his queen. The impact of his first wife, Aemma Arryn, on his decision-making and guilt cannot be overstated. Her death in childbirth, that forced choice between a father and a king, left a hollow inside him that could never truly be filled. The guilt was immense. He had chosen the realm over her, and in doing so, he damned every relationship he would ever have after that moment. This conviction seeped into his bones. He looked at his daughter Rhaenyra and saw not just an heir, but the living price of his failure as a husband. He needed to protect her, to legitimize her choice as his successor, because admitting she couldn't rule would mean admitting that her mother's wretched sacrifice was worthless. He was a haunted man from that night onward, and a haunted man rarely makes clear decisions. And so, deep in his loneliness, he turned to Alicent Hightower. She was a comfort, a familiar face in his grief. He married her for peace of mind, but the political ramifications of his second marriage to Alicent Hightower were devastating to the realm. The marriage was a declaration of war on the faction of his own blood. Even if he never saw it that way, it brought the Hightowers, the faith, and the traditionalists of the Reach directly into the heart of the succession. It gave Otter Hightower a direct path to the throne for his grandson, and it gave the court a clear faction to rally behind. The Greens were born the moment the wedding vows were spoken. Viserys, in his desperate search for a warm home, failed to see the cold strategy surrounding him. He believed he was healing his heart, but he was fracturing the kingdom. This defines Viserys as a tragic figure who prioritized family harmony over political reality. He is perhaps the most tragic figure in the entire story of the dance, because he is not a bad man. He is a weak man in the worst possible position. He demanded that his children love each other, that his wife and his daughter make peace. He gave Alicent a seat at the table. He gave Rhaenyra the crown, and he trusted that his love alone would be enough to make it all work. He ignored the Green Council meeting in his own hall. He dismissed the rumours about Rhaenyra's sons. He looked the other way, because to look directly at the truth would destroy the fragile world he had built. He died, slowly rotting from the inside out, a literal and figurative shell of a king, having chosen the illusion of a family over the brutal reality of succession. His legacy was not peace but a powder keg, and when that shell finally crumbled, when his hand grew still, and the realm held its breath, the waiting was over. The law of Westeros pointed one way, his dying word pointed another. The weight of an entire dynasty now rested entirely upon the shoulders of the one he had spent decades trying to fortify against the storm, the one who carried the weight of his crown, his guilt, and his impossible expectations. The story now moves away from the father and finds its flame in the daughter, the Princess of Dragonstone, standing alone on a path that was chosen for her, long before she ever agreed to walk it. King Viserys I spent his reign trying to hold a realm together that was always quietly coming apart. He was a good man, a generous king, but his greatest gift was also his heaviest burden. He had no true son by his first wife Amma Arryn, only a daughter, and in naming that daughter his heir, he set in motion a chain of events that would crack the foundations of the Iron Throne itself. That daughter was Rhaenyra Targaryen, the Princess of Dragonstone, and her story is one of transformation from a beloved princess into something far more steeled, far more dangerous. She was called the Realm's Delight in her youth. You have to understand what that meant in the context of King's Landing. Rhaenyra was not just a pretty face on a dragon. She was intelligent, charismatic, and deeply aware of her own worth. The small folk adored her because she had her father's gentle nature, but she also carried the fire of old Valyria in her blood. When she flew on Syrax, her golden-scaled dragon, the city would stop and watch. She was a symbol of Targaryen power made beautiful, made accessible, but power in Westeros is never safe, and neither was Rhaenyra. The weight of being the first woman named heir to the Iron Throne pressed on her from a very young age. There had never been a ruling queen in the Seven Kingdoms. No woman had sat the Iron Throne, though many had tried and failed. Viserys, in his grief over Amma's death, had made a bold, unprecedented choice when he announced Rhaenyra as his successor. But a choice made in grief is not always a choice honoured by others. The realm swore oaths to her. Yes, lords from every corner of Westeros knelt and pledged their swords to the Princess of Dragonstone. But oaths, as we know, are only as strong as the fear behind them, and fear in this case was tied to dragons. Viserys had a dragon, Rhaenyra had a dragon. For a time, that was enough. But time is a slow poison. As the years passed and Viserys remarried to Alicent Hightower, daughter of his hand, the court began to shift. New sons were born, Aegon, Aemond, Daemon, and suddenly the oaths sworn to Rhaenyra felt like old parchment in a rainy tower. The question of who should rule after Viserys became not just a political dispute, but a raw personal war. And at the heart of that war was the legitimacy of Rhaenyra's own children. Now this is where the controversy bites deepest. Rhaenyra married Sir Lyonor Velaryon, the son of Corlys the Sea Snake and Princess Rhaenys. It was a political match meant to bind two great houses, but it was also a marriage without love, without passion, and perhaps without any real union at all. Lyonor was not interested in women. Everyone who mattered knew it, and yet after several years of marriage, Rhaenyra gave birth to 3 sons, Jacaerys, Lucerys and Joffrey. They were brown-haired, pug-nosed, and looked nothing like their silver-haired father. They looked instead like Sir Harwin Strong, the commander of the City Watch, and the man who had become Rhaenyra's sworn protector and her lover. The rumours were everywhere. They were whispered in the corridors of the Red Keep, shouted in the streets of Flea Bottom, and murmured over cups of wine in the gardens of Highgarden. The children were called the Strong Boys, an insult wrapped in a truth. Harwin Strong was their biological father, though Lyonor claimed them legally. But in a world where bloodline is everything, where Targaryen silver hair is a mark of divine right, the dark hair of those 3 princes was a crack in the foundation of Rhaenyra's claim. If her children were bastards, then Aegon II's claim, the true-born first son of the king, suddenly looked much stronger, and Rhaenyra knew this. She felt it every time someone glanced at her sons, and then looked away. She heard it in the silences of the court. This controversy over the parentage of her children hardened her. It turned her from the realm's delight into something more guarded, more calculating. She began to see enemies everywhere, and she was not entirely wrong. The Greens, the faction supporting Alicent and Aegon, were already weaving their webs. Otto Hightower the Hand was patient and ruthless. Alicent herself, once Rhaenyra's closest friend, became her most determined adversary. But Rhaenyra was not alone. She had Daemon Targaryen, her uncle, a man of fire and blood and dangerous ambition. Their relationship is one of the most complex in all of Westerosi history. Daemon was the black sheep of the family, a warrior, a killer, a rogue prince who had been passed over for the throne again and again. He married Rhaenyra after Lynor's death, which, conveniently or not, occurred under mysterious circumstances. Daemon had always wanted power, and Rhaenyra offered a path to it. But there was also genuine love between them, a magnetic pull of 2 fierce souls who understood each other's hunger. He was her protector, her consort, and her most dangerous weapon. But his influence also pushed her toward actions she might not have taken alone. He fed her resentment, encouraged her defiance, and in the end, their union would shape the entire course of the war. Rhaenyra's journey from a carefree princess to a hardened war leader was not a sudden fall. It was a slow, grinding erosion of trust, of hope, of innocence. Every betrayal she endured, from her stepmother, from the lords who broke their oaths, from the whispers that her sons were bastards, chipped away at the girl who had once flown Syrax over the streets of King's Landing with a smile on her face. By the time the Dance of the Dragons truly began, she was no longer the realm's delight. She was a queen with blood on her hands, a mother who would sacrifice anything to protect her children, and a dragon rider who understood that mercy was a luxury she could no longer afford. The weight she carried was immense, not just the weight of a crown, but the weight of being the first. Every decision she made would set a precedent for every woman who ever dared to claim the throne after her. She knew that, and she knew that if she failed, the dream of a ruling queen would die for generations. That is a burden no one should have to bear alone, and yet she bore it, with Daemon at her side for as long as she could. And Daemon, the rogue prince, had ambitions of his own, ambitions that would soon take them both to places they could never return from. The next chapter of this story, the one that follows Rhaenyra's transformation, is the tale of Daemon Targaryen, the man who loved power almost as much as he loved her, and the choices that would define them both. Rhaenyra Targaryen, the realm's delight, grew up surrounded by the weight of expectation and the shadows of the men who sought to control her fate. Her father, Viserys, offered a legacy of peace. The Strongs offered a hidden affection that birthed dangerous rumours. But one man in her life offered something entirely different. He offered a mirror, not a reflection of her duty, but of her desire, danger, fire, blood, and an unapologetic claim to the birthright of their ancient house. That man was Daemon Targaryen, and understanding him is understanding the spark that threatened to ignite the Seven Kingdoms long before the first flame of the dance ever touched a dragon. By the time of the Great Council and the early years of Viserys' reign, the realm knew exactly what that name was. Daemon Targaryen is the most unpredictable and dangerous man in Westeros, not because he is the strongest swordsman, though he is one of them, not because he is the most cunning strategist, though he has a sharp mind. He is dangerous because he is a man completely unbound by the rules that govern everyone else. He feels the constraints of courtly life not as a structure to be respected, but as a cage to be broken, or worse, a game to be mocked. His ambition is a living thing, a dragon in its own right that coils around his heart. He craves the crown, but he also craves the chaos required to take it. He wants the legacy of a conqueror, but he will not kneel long enough to build an empire. He is the iron nail in the wheel of the realm, and every time the wheel turns, he jams the spokes. This volatility is perfectly illustrated in his handling of the City Watch. Viserys, hoping to give his troublesome brother a sense of purpose, appointed him commander. Daemon took this role and he bent it to his will. He shaped the gold cloaks from a corrupt, ragtag militia into a fearsome instrument of order. He drilled them, armed them, and paid them from his own pocket, instilling in them a ruthless loyalty that answered to no law but his own. This is Daemon's dual nature, a hero to the City Watch and a villain to the small council. To the common man of Flea Bottom, Daemon was a terror and a deliverer. He would cut off a thief's hand with brutal efficiency, but he would also walk the streets at night, a patron of the city's darkest corners, a king of the gutter. He gave the city order, but it was his order. The small council saw this and panicked. They saw not a reformed prince, but a warlord building an army within the city walls. Their fear was justified. Daemon does not do anything for purely altruistic reasons. Every act of justice was a reminder of his power. This restlessness of spirit finds its perfect, terrifying counterpart in his dragon. If Daemon is the heart of the storm, Caraxes is the lightning and the thunder. The history of the bloodworm, Caraxes, and their shared thirst for battle is one of the great, terrifying epics of the Targaryen dynasty. Caraxes was not a young dragon when Daemon claimed him. He had already been ridden by Prince Aemon, the father of Rhaenys, the queen who never was. Caraxes had tasted battle and blood, but when Daemon took the saddle, the dragon found its true master. Caraxes is a worm of immense size and terrible reputation. His body is long and sinuous, a scarlet serpent of muscle and fury. His roar is said to be uniquely shrill and terrifying, a sound that promises death in the skies. Daemon and Caraxes are bonded by a shared bloodlust. When Daemon took to the Stepstones, it was not just a war for a crown or a title, it was a hunt. They fought together, not as rider and mount, but as two predators working in concert. Where Daemon went, Caraxes followed, and the smoke of their destruction was a testament to a bond forged in absolute violence. They understand each other because they want the same thing. The thrill of the contest, the heat of the fire, the surrender of an enemy. This brings us to the central question that every lord in Westeros, and perhaps Viserys himself, asked every day. What does Daemon really want? His ultimate goal? Power, legacy, or simply the thrill of the chaos? He claims the crown, but when he gets a taste of it, as King of the Narrow Sea or Prince of the City, he grows bored. He fights for his brother, but he constantly undermines him. He marries for love and for spite, binding himself to Rhaenyra in a union that was as much a political weapon as it was a passionate flame. It is possible that Daemon does not know what he wants, and that is the most terrifying possibility of all. He is a creature of the immediate. He sees an injustice, he punishes it. He sees a throne, he wants it. He sees a slight, he avenges it. He is not building a long-term legacy, he is living a saga. Every day is a verse in a song of fire and blood, and he intends to make sure the song is loud enough to be heard for 1,000 years. He is the shadow that proves the existence of the light, the villain that justifies the hero, and the chaos that gives meaning to order. He is the rogue prince, and his ambition is the tempo of the coming storm. And it is this storm that creates a reaction. Faced with Daemon's raw, unmanageable power, the court at King's Landing does what it must to survive. It fortifies. It builds walls not of stone, but of faith and duty. The hand of the king, Otto Hightower, looks at Daemon and sees the end of everything his family has worked for. But it is not Otto alone who orchestrates the defense. It is his daughter, the quiet, dutiful queen who spends her hours in prayer and her days in the shadow of the throne. She watches Daemon's chaos with a growing, silent terror, and she realizes that if the realm is to survive, if her children are to survive, a different kind of power must rise to meet the fire, a power that is patient, pious, and deeply, deeply political. The quiet queen begins to build a structure of steel and stone. She does not have a dragon that thirsts for battle, but she has the iron will of the Height Towers, the faith of the Seven, and a resolve hardened by the fear of what a man like Daemon can do to a kingdom. She is the architect of everything that follows, the queen who polished her armor in the quiet of the prayer alcove while the realm slept, and her name is Alicent. We left Daemon Targaryen prowling the shadows of the Stepstones, a rogue prince with a dragon's hunger for battle and a kingdom's worth of ambition burning in his chest. His story is one of fire and unpredictability, but across the Red Keep, a different kind of fire was being kindled, not the flash of dragon flame, but the slow, patient burn of a woman who would become the architect of the Greens. Her name was Alicent Hightower. She began as Rhaenyra Targaryen's closest companion, a girl who read to the king in his chambers, who whispered secrets with the princess under the weirwood tree. That friendship was real once. You could see it in the way they laughed together, the way they leaned on each other during the weight of court life. That the seeds of rivalry were sown long before either of them understood what they were planting. And the gardener was Alicent's father, Otto Hightower. Otto was Hand of the King, a man of quiet, calculated ambition. He saw the realm through the lens of legacy and power, and he saw his daughter as a piece on the board. When Queen Aemma died, he did not weep for her. He saw an opening. He dressed Alicent in the queen's own gown, sent her to Viserys' chambers with a book and a gentle word, and watched as the king, still grieving, began to see a new comfort. Alicent was young, barely more than a child, but she did what she was told. She became the king's second wife, and in doing so, she became the mother of a rival claimant to the throne. But here is the tragedy of Alicent Hightower. She was not born a schemer. She learned it. Otto taught her that the world was a place where second place meant death, where a woman's worth was measured by the sons she bore, and where those sons could be slaughtered the moment a rival took power. When Viserys named Rhaenyra his heir, Alicent tried to believe the promise of peace, but she had seen enough of court to know that promises are brittle things. And when her own children, Aegon, Helaena, were born, her fear crystallized into something cold and unyielding. That fear found its most famous expression in a dress. On the day of the royal hunt, as the court gathered to celebrate the succession, Alicent walked into the great hall wearing a gown of deep, vibrant green. It was not a choice of fashion. Green was the colour of House Hightower, yes, but it was also the colour of the beacon fire that burns atop the high tower in Old Town, a signal that war is coming. Every lord and lady in that hall understood the message. Rhaenyra, standing in her black and red, saw it too. That green dress was a declaration. It said, "I will not let my children be cast aside. I will not let them be second. I will fight." From that moment, The friendship between Alicent and Rhaenyra was dead. In its place grew a bitter personal war. Alicent believed she was protecting her children, and in a way, she was right. The world of Westeros does not forgive those who lose. Aegon, her eldest son, was a drunken, reluctant king, but he was her son, and a mother's love, twisted by fear, can become the sharpest blade in the realm. Otto Hightower's influence never left her. He whispered about prophecies, about duty, about the Targaryen tradition of male inheritance. He told her that Rhaenyra would never be safe on the throne, that the realm would bleed, and that her children's blood would be the first to spill. Alicent listened. She became the leader of the Greens, not because she wanted power, but because she wanted survival. The line between protection and ambition grew thin, then invisible, and so when Viserys finally drew his last breath, Alicent did not hesitate. She moved to crown Aegon before the news could reach Dragonstone. She sealed the doors, silenced the dissent, and lit the green flame that would consume the realm. The friend who once read histories with Rhaenyra became the architect of a civil war that would kill thousands and extinguish dragons. But even as she sat in the Great Hall, watching her son wear the Conqueror's crown, she must have felt the weight of what she had done, because in that moment, she was not just a queen mother. She was the girl who had lost her only true friend, and the woman who had traded innocence for a throne that would never be safe. That green dress haunted the Red Keep. It marked the point of no return, and from its folds, the dance of the dragons emerged. A war that would test every bond, shatter every house, and ultimately leave a young king named Aegon II sitting on a throne that belonged to his sister. But that story, the story of the golden dragon who wore the crown, is one we will trace in the shadows of the next chapter. Of all the Targaryen kings who ever sat the Iron Throne, few were as reluctant to take it as Aegon II, and that reluctance, born not from cowardice, but from a deep, almost prophetic understanding of what the crown would cost him, is the heart of his tragedy. Alicent Hightower had spent years preparing her son for a throne he never wanted, shaping him with her own quiet desperation and her father Otto's political calculus. But you cannot force a man to desire power. You can only place the burden upon his shoulders and watch how he carries it. Aegon II was not a cruel man by nature, not at first. He was aimless, indulgent, and deeply resentful of the expectations placed upon him. His father Viserys I had made clear that Rhaenyra was his chosen heir, and for years that seemed like a relief to Aegon. He could drink, he could chase pleasure, he could avoid the suffocating weight of duty. But when Viserys died, the Green faction moved swiftly. They crowned him in the dead of night, placing a crown upon his head that felt more like a yoke. And from that moment, Aegon II became a king in name, but inside he remained the same reluctant boy who had never asked for any of it. His dragon, Sunfire, was said to be the most beautiful creature ever born of Targaryen blood. Scales of gleaming gold, wings that caught the sunlight like molten metal, a creature of pure, radiant grace. Where other dragons inspired terror, Sunfire inspired wonder. The chroniclers wrote that he was the most beautiful dragon in all the world, and they were not exaggerating. But beauty does not make a war easier. It does not make a man a stronger ruler. Sunfire's magnificence was a symbol of the Targaryen legacy, but symbols alone cannot hold a kingdom together. Aegon carried the weight of his name, Aegon the Conqueror, the man who had forged the 7 kingdoms with fire and blood. How do you live up to that? How do you rule when the very name you bear belongs to a god among men? Aegon II knew he was no conqueror. He was a man who stumbled into a throne, who woke up one morning to find that his mother and grandfather had decided his life for him. And in that internal war, the battle between what he was expected to be and what he actually was, Aegon began to break. He did not want to fight Rhaenyra. He did not want to kill his half-sister. But the Greens pushed him, the realm pulled him, and the war demanded a king who could make terrible choices. Aegon made them, but each choice carved away another piece of his soul. He was a king who had never truly wanted to rule. and that made him both dangerous and tragic. Dangerous because a reluctant king often lashes out unpredictably. Tragic because we watch a man become something he never intended to be, and we know that the path he walks leads only to ashes. Next, we must turn to the woman caught in the middle of this storm, his sister wife, Helaena, gentle and sorrowful, whose own story holds a darkness that even the dragons could not burn away. And so we move from Aegon II, the reluctant king crowned in haste, to the one person in that family who perhaps understood the tragedy before it even began. Helaena Targaryen, the dreamer, the gentle soul caught in the maw of a dragon's war, where Aegon drank and warred his way through a crown he never wanted. Helaena saw everything. She saw the blood, the fire, the children lost, and she could not change a single thread of it. Helaena Targaryen was not like the rest of her kin. The Targaryens are known for their fire, their ambition, their ruthless drive to claim power. But Helaena was soft. She collected insects, finding beauty in the smallest, most delicate creatures. She spoke in riddles that seemed nonsense to the court, but were in truth prophecies whispered from a mind that glimpsed the tapestry of time. She rode Dreamfire, a pale blue dragon with silver horns, a creature as ethereal and otherworldly as she was. Dreamfire was not the largest dragon, not the most feared, but she was ancient, and she carried Helaena with a tenderness that dragon riders rarely show. Their bond was not one of conquest, but of quiet understanding. Helena's tragedy is that she was born into a family that valued strength over gentleness. She married her brother Aegon, as Targaryens often did, but there was no love there. Aegon ignored her, abused her in his own careless way, while Helaena retreated into her dreams. And those dreams were not gifts, they were curses. She saw the future, but she could never prevent it. She knew that her children would die, that the war would tear the realm apart, that her own life would end in a window shattered by madness. She spoke of beasts with no eyes, of a king with no crown, of a treasure lost beyond the sea, and no one listened. No one could decipher her words until it was far too late. In the books and in the show, her prophecies are layered like poetry. She foresaw the death of her son, Jaehaerys, the little boy murdered in his bed by assassins who came for Aegon, but took the wrong child. She knew before it happened. She told her mother, Alicent, that the beast beneath the boards would come. She spoke of a storm of swords and a tower falling. Her words haunted the court, but they were dismissed as the ramblings of a strange girl. And when the war came, when the Greens and Blacks tore each other apart, Helaena was the first to break. She could not bear the weight of her own visions. She threw herself from a window in the Red Keep, ending her life in a fall that mirrored the fall of her house. That is the heart of her tragedy. Not just that she died, but that she knew she would die, and she knew she could not stop it. She was the dreamer who saw the future and could not change it. Her gentle nature, her love for her children, her quietness, all of it made her the most innocent member of a family that had no room for innocence. The war did not spare her. It did not spare anyone, but it consumed Helaena in a different way, not by dragonfire, but by the slow, creeping horror of a mind that could not look away from what was coming. And so, how the violence of the Dance of the Dragons reached into every corner of the royal family. Even those who never wielded a sword, never gave an order, never sat a throne, were devoured. The tragedy of Helaena is a lesson in what happens when power corrupts every relationship, when the innocent become collateral in a war between egos. It is a story that echoes down the centuries, a reminder that the price of a crown is often paid in the blood of those who never wanted it. And speaking of old powers and ancient seats, there is a city in the Reach that holds secrets older than the Targaryens themselves, a place where the stars are studied, where the faith of the Seven was born, and where a certain family has watched kingdoms rise and fall for thousands of years. That is the Power of Oldtown, and it is a force that will shape this story in ways few expect. The previous chapter left us with Helaena, the dreamer who saw the flames before they came, a gentle soul caught in a war she never wanted. But to understand how that war truly began, we have to look away from the dragon pit for a moment, away from the throne room, and south to the mouth of the Honeywine, where the city of Oldtown rises like a fossilized prayer. The high towers of Oldtown are a house older than the Targaryens themselves. This is not a boast, it is a geological fact. When Aegon the Conqueror first set foot on the shores of Westeros, the high towers had already ruled the Reach for thousands of years. Their bloodline stretches back to the first men, to the days when the children of the forest still whispered in the deep woods. The high towers did not kneel to the dragons. They negotiated, and in that negotiation, they secured something more valuable than a crown. They secured their permanence. Oldtown is the intellectual and spiritual heart of the Seven Kingdoms. Within its walls stand two institutions that would become the silent architects of the Green Coup. The first is the Citadel, a labyrinth of stone and knowledge where maesters forge their chains, a place where history is written, rewritten, and sometimes erased. The second is the Starry Sept, the ancient seat of the faith of the Seven, a cathedral built from black marble that glitters like a starry sky when the light hits it just right. These two pillars, knowledge and faith, gave Otto Hightower the tools he needed to pull the strings of the realm. Otto Hightower's long game was not about brute force. He understood that power is not a sword. It is a whisper in the right ear at the right time. He placed his daughter Alicent in the Red Keep, first as a companion to the king, then as his wife. He watched as Viserys grew old and frail, and he saw the cracks in the succession. He knew that Rhaenyra, for all her fire, was a woman in a world that despised women, and he knew that Aegon, his grandson, was a boy who could be shaped, moulded, and crowned. But Otto did not act alone. The power of Oldtown flowed through him, like the Honeywine itself. The Citadel provided the legal arguments, the ancient precedents, the dusty tomes that said a son must come before a daughter. The Starry Sept provided the moral authority, the blessing of the gods, the voice of the High Septon, declaring that a usurper's crown was a holy thing. The Reach's wealth, its golden wheat fields, its bustling ports, its endless vineyards, fueled the rebellion. Every golden dragon that paid for a green cloak, every barrel of arbor gold that sweetened a lord's loyalty, came from the bounty of the Mander. This is the power of Oldtown. It is not the power of dragonfire, it is the power of patience. The High Towers did not need to ride beasts of legend, because they had already tamed the most dangerous creature of all, time itself. They had waited through the reign of dragons, through the doom of Valyria, through the rise and fall of kings. They knew that the Targaryens were a storm, and all storms eventually pass. So when the dance began, the Hightowers did not fight for the throne. They fought for the future, for a world where the Citadel's ink and the Sept's incense would outlast the ash of dragons. The Reach, that vast and fertile land, became the engine of the Green Rebellion. Its lords, the Tyrells, the Rowans, the Oakhearts, were bound to Oldtown by marriage, by debt, by tradition. They did not love Aegon, but they loved stability. They feared the chaos of a woman on the throne, the whispers of bastard blood, the shadow of Daemon Targaryen's cruelty. And so they raised their banners, not for a king, but for an idea. That order must be preserved, even if it must be preserved through fire. When the war finally came, Oldtown did not send its armies to the field. It sent its ravens, its gold, its prayers. The Citadel's maesters whispered in the ears of lords across the realm, spreading doubt about Rhaenyra's claim. The Starry Sept's preachers thundered from pulpits, calling the princess a harlot and her children abominations. The Hightowers themselves sat in their tower, watching the world burn, knowing that when the smoke cleared, their blood would still be on the throne. But the Dance of the Dragons was not just a war of succession, it was a war of worlds. The old world of the first men, of the faith, of the Citadel, clashed with the new world of the Targaryens, of dragons, of fire and blood. And in that clash, Oldtown chose its side not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear of a woman who would break the chains of tradition. As the flames of the dance spread across the realm, Towers sat in their tower, watching. They had placed their bets, and they were patient. They knew that dragons die. They knew that fire fades. And they knew that Oldtown would remain, as it had for thousands of years, a silent monument to the power of patience. Now, as the war rages and the dragons dance, we must look to the blood of old Valyria itself. For if the high towers represent the ancient, the patient, the enduring, then the Targaryens represent the volatile, the magnificent, the doomed. And in the next chapter, we will explore the blood of old Valyria, the fire that still burns in the veins of those who rode the beasts of legend, and ask whether that fire can ever truly be extinguished. The high towers of Oldtown have stood for millennia, their beacon a constant in a world of shifting power, but even they are young, compared to the empire that once dominated the known world, an empire that crumbled in a single night. That empire was Valyria, and its bloodline, its language, its very obsession with purity still haunts Westeros centuries later. To understand the Targaryens, we have to look beyond Dragonstone, beyond Aegon's conquest, and into the heart of the freehold itself. Before the Doom, Valyria was not a kingdom ruled by one family. It was a sprawling continent-spanning empire governed by 40 dragon-riding houses, each with its own lands, its own dragons, its own ambitions. These houses were the true masters of the world, lords of fire and blood, who held such power that no single ruler could dominate them all. The freehold was a republic of sorts, but a republic where the vote belonged only to those who could tame a dragon. The 40 families formed the backbone of a civilization that built roads of fused stone, forged steel that could cut through leather and bone, and raised cities like Antitis and Liz as colonies. Their language, High Valyrian, became the tongue of magic, law, and high culture, a refined language of flowing vowels and precise grammar. Within this pantheon of dragon lords, the Targaryens were a footnote. They were not one of the great houses, not the Orions, not the Vaelors, not the Belloris. Their ancestral holdings were on the far eastern fringes of the empire, on the volcanic island of Dragonstone, a relatively small and remote outpost. They owned few dragons compared to the great families, and their political influence was negligible. In the Grand Council of the 40, a Targaryen voice was rarely heard and never heeded. They were considered minor, even poor, clinging to the edges of a civilization that had grown decadent and arrogant. But arrogance has a price. The doom of Valyria was not a natural disaster in the way we understand earthquakes or volcanoes. It was something far more terrible. A cataclysm that shattered the peninsula, sending fire through the sky, turning the sea to steam, and unleashing horrors that twisted the land for centuries. The cause remains a mystery. Some say the Faceless Men, their order born from the mines of Valyria, finally exacted a divine vengeance for the slavery that fueled the freehold's wealth. Others whisper that the Dragon Lords, in their hubris, dug too deep into the earth and awakened something they could not control. The truth is lost, swallowed by fire and time. What is known is that only one of the 40 dragon-riding families survived the doom, House Targaryen, and the question that has haunted historians and masters for 400 years is why? Why were the least powerful, the most isolated, the family with the fewest dragons, the only ones to escape? There are theories. The Targaryens had a dreamer among them, Daenerys the Dreamer, who foresaw the destruction 12 years before it happened. She convinced her father, Aegon, to sell their holdings in the capital and move their entire household, including 5 dragons, to the fortress of Dragonstone. It was an act of incredible foresight, or perhaps a gift of prophecy, but it does not explain why none of the other families saw the visions, or why no other house survived even by chance. Perhaps the Targaryens were simply in the right place at the right time, far enough from the epicenter to avoid the worst. Perhaps their blood carried something the other families lacked, a resilience or a connection to magic that allowed them to weather the storm. Masters of Oldtown, ever skeptical of the supernatural, suggest that the doom was a localized geological event, and the Targaryens simply happen to be on the edge of the blast radius. But that feels too convenient. The mystery lingers, a shadow over every Targaryen claim to power. After the Doom, the Targaryens clung to Dragonstone for a century. Their dragons growing slowly in number, their bloodlines mixing in a desperate attempt to preserve the purity of Old Valyria. That obsession with purity, with incestuous marriages, with maintaining the silver gold hair and violet eyes, is one of the most visible cultural remnants of the freehold. Even in exile, the Targaryens refused to dilute their blood with Westerosi stock. They saw themselves as the last heirs of a lost empire, and they acted accordingly, wearing the flowing robes and intricate jewelry of their ancestors, speaking High Valyrian in court, and demanding that their subjects learn at least a few words of their sacred tongue. The language itself is another remnant. Many words from the freehold survive in the common tongue: Dracarys, Valar Morghulis, Valar Dohaeris, but the grammar and syntax are all but lost to all but the most learned maesters. The Targaryens used High Valyrian to command their dragons, to seal royal decrees, and to speak above the heads of common folk. It was a tool of both power and mystique, a way to remind everyone that they were different, that they were better, that they were the blood of Old Valyria. Their fashion too echoed the freehold. The dragonbone chokers, the intricate rings, the long braids, all were symbols of a civilization that believed itself immortal, and in a sense, they were right. Valyria's legacy survives in every Targaryen child born with white hair, in every dragon egg laid on Dragonstone, in every burning city that reminds the world what fire and blood can do. But the survival of the Targaryens remains the greatest riddle. How did a minor house, with little political weight and only a handful of dragons, become the last dragon lords of the world? Some believe it was an accident of geography. Others see the hand of destiny, a thread pulled by the same forces that later brought Daenerys across the narrow sea. And still others, perhaps the maesters especially, fear that the answer is something far more unsettling, that the Targaryens did not escape the doom by luck, that they knew something the other families did not, that they may have even helped cause it. Those whispers are dangerous. They are the kind of talk that gets a man sent to the wall. But in the quiet of the library, over candlelight and old scrolls, the question remains. And until we know what truly happened in Valyria on that fiery night, the Targaryens will be mystery wrapped in dragon scales. We will explore how that mystery was physically represented in the throne they built, a seat of power that changed with every reign, and what it says about the family that terrified a continent for 3 centuries. The story of the Iron Throne is more than just a story of swords and conquest. It is a story of design, of madness, and of a dynasty's slow decline. That is where we will turn next, to redesigning the Iron Throne. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. The Valyrian freehold crumbled into ash and sea, but the Targaryens carried one legacy across the narrow sea that would never rust or tarnish. When Aegon the Conqueror forged his new realm, he did not sit on a throne of gold or carved stone. He sat on a mountain of swords, thousands of them, ripped from the hands of his defeated enemies and fused together by dragonfire. That throne, the Iron Throne, is one of the most iconic symbols in all of Westeros. But if you think you know it from the original series, you have only seen a shadow of what it once was. Set nearly 200 years before the Mad King's reign, the throne is not just larger, it is more dangerous. The designers went back to the source material, George R.R. Martin's own descriptions, and built something that feels less like a chair and more like a trap. The swords that form its back and arms are not neatly arranged into steps and rails. They are jagged, uneven, pointing in every direction, many of them standing upright, so that anyone who approaches must navigate a forest of bare steel. The result is a silhouette that looks almost alive, bristling with threat. But the most striking change is the floor. In the original show, The throne sat a Simbus, cool and distant. In the prequel, the swords not stop at the base. They spread outward, hundreds and hundreds of melted blades fanning across the throne room floor. Like the roots of a metal tree, the set designers built an actual, physical extension of the throne, creating a treacherous field of twisted steel that any visitor must cross. It is a constant reminder that this is not a seat of comfort, it is a seat of conquest. And the ground itself is made from the weapons of the fallen. Why does the throne look so much more raw in this era? Because the Targaryens were closer to their origins. Aegon the Conqueror had been dead only a few generations. The dragons were still numerous, the bloodlines still strong, and the iron fist of their rule had not yet softened into diplomacy and courtly games. The throne was built in fire and blood, and it looked the part. It was untamed, rough-hewn, a brutal monument to the violence that carved out the Seven Kingdoms. By the time of, centuries of wear and polishing had smoothed the edges, and the throne had become more of a relic than a living weapon. It is still a weapon. That danger is not just decorative. The throne is physically perilous to sit upon. Kings have cut themselves, bled, even lost fingers to the jagged edges. It is said that Aegon the Conqueror himself ordered the swords to be left sharp so that no ruler would ever grow comfortable. The Iron Throne is designed to punish anyone who sits too long, who forgets that power comes with a price. In the prequel, characters approach it with visible caution, knowing that one wrong step could leave a permanent scar. This is not a throne that welcomes you. It challenges you, tests you, wounds you. The burden of rule is written into the very metal, and when you look at the floor, with those melted swords radiating outward like a frozen explosion, you realize something deeper. This is not just a throne for one person. It is a throne that claims the whole hall. The journey to the king is as dangerous as the king himself. The symbolism is unmistakable. The Targaryen dynasty is not a gentle institution. It is a battlefield made furniture, a constant reminder that every ruler sits upon the weapons of their enemies, and those enemies may one day rise again. So the next time you watch a scene set in the Red Keep's throne room, pay attention to the floor. Notice how the light catches those twisted blades, how the camera lingers on the sheer chaos of the design. It is the visual signature of an era when dragons ruled the sky and the Iron Throne was still sharp enough to draw blood. That sharpness extends beyond the metal. The Targaryen philosophy is built on a single, uncompromising phrase, and it is time to explore what that motto really meant for the family that rode the last dragons. In the next chapter, we will sit with those words, fire and blood, and understand how they shaped not just a war, but an entire way of thinking. The previous chapter left us standing before the Iron Throne, that monstrous sculpture of 1,000 melted swords, sprawling across the floor like a frozen forest of war. But every throne has its creed, and for House Targaryen, that creed is carved into the very stone of Dragonstone and whispered in the high halls of the Red Keep. Fire and blood. It is a promise, a threat, and a confession all at once. And tonight, we are going to take that motto apart, piece by piece, until we understand what it really meant for the Dragon Lords who lived by it. Fire and blood. The words are simple, almost brutish, but they carry the weight of 300 years of conquest, incest, and madness. On the surface, they are a declaration of power. We will burn you, we will bleed you, and there is nothing you can do to stop us. When Aegon the Conqueror first set foot on the shores of Westeros, he did not come with treaties or marriage alliances. He came with Balerion the Black Dread, a beast whose shadow could swallow a city. Fire and blood was the ultimatum offered to every king who knelt. Bend the knee or watch your castle turn to ash. And when they refused, the dragons did exactly what the motto promised. But there is a deeper layer, a metaphorical meaning that runs like a vein of dragon glass through the family's history. Fire and blood is not just an external weapon, it is the internal nature of the Targaryens themselves. Fire is their passion, their ambition, their reckless drive to claim what they believe is theirs by right. Blood is the cost of that ambition. The blood of enemies, yes, but also the blood of their own kin. The Targaryen coin, as they say, has two sides, greatness and madness. Fire gives them the vision to conquer, to dream of dragon dreams, to build an empire that lasted 3 centuries. But blood is the price they pay for that fire. It is the constant threat of burning from within. This duality is the heart of the Targaryen tragedy. For every Aegon the Conqueror, there is a Maegor the Cruel. For every Jaehaerys the Conciliator, there is a Rhaenyra who loses everything. The motto does not discriminate. It serves as a warning to outsiders. Do not test us, or we will unleash fire and blood upon your lands. But it also serves as a curse upon the family itself. To live by fire and blood means to accept that you will eventually be consumed by it. The Dragon Lords of Old Valyria understood this better than anyone. They did not just tame dragons. They bound them with blood magic and ritual, a practice that demanded sacrifice and endurance. The bond between rider and dragon was not a gift. It was a pact sealed in fire and blood, a union that required both to be complete. Consider the rituals of the Dragonlord tradition. When a Targaryen child first approached a dragon, they did not simply climb onto its back. They had to face the beast's breath, its fury, its hunger. The dragon would decide whether to accept them. And that acceptance was not based on birthright alone. It was based on something deeper, a kind of spiritual compatibility that the Maesters still do not fully understand. And once the bond was made, it was permanent. The rider would feel the dragon's pain, its joy, its rage. They would dream of flying through skies black with smoke. They would share a life that ended only when one of them died, and often they died together. Fire and blood was not just a motto for battle. It was the principle behind every dragon egg laid on the ashes of a funeral pyre, every hatchling that emerged from the flames of a mother's grief. The motto also shaped the Targaryen approach to succession and conflict. When Viserys I lay dying, the realm held its breath. He had named Rhaenyra his heir. But the Greens had another interpretation of what fire and blood meant. To them, the blood of the dragon demanded a male heir, or at least a king who would uphold the purity of the line. Aegon II's coronation was not just a political coup. It was an assertion that the true fire of the Targaryen dynasty came through the male line. But Rhaenyra and her blacks stood on the other side of that same coin. They believed that fire was not about gender, but about intent. If Viserys had lit the torch and pointed to his daughter, then her claim was sacred. The war that followed, the Dance of the Dragons, was the ultimate expression of fire and blood turned inward. Dragons fought dragons, and the blood of the family soaked the ground of Westeros until there was barely a Targaryen left standing. And what of the rituals meant to preserve the bond? The Dragon Lords of Old Valyria performed ceremonies that involved blood sacrifices, not just of animals but of slaves. The Targaryens, once they came to Westeros, abandoned the worst of those practices, but echoes remained. The pyre on which Daenerys' brother was crowned, the funeral flames that gave life to her dragons. These are the remnants of a tradition that saw fire not as destruction, but as transformation. Blood and fire together could create something new, or they could end something old. The motto was never just a threat. It was a philosophy of rebirth through destruction. So when we hear fire and blood, we should hear the roar of Caraxes as Daemon Targaryen rides into battle. But we should also hear the weeping of Helaena as she foresees the deaths of her children. We should see the black dread descending on Harrenhal, but we should also see the empty dragon pits of King's Landing after the war. The motto is a mirror. For enemies, it reflects terror. The family, it reflects inevitable ruin. And yet the Targaryens never abandoned it. Even as their dragons shrank, even as their power waned, they clung to those two words like a prayer. It was the last thread connecting them to the glory of Old Valyria, to the dream of a dynasty that would never end. But every thread can burn, and that is where we turn next, to the symbol that holds the entire story together, the 3 heads of the dragon. Because if fire and blood is the philosophy, the 3-headed dragon is the family's sacred geometry, the pattern they believed would save them. but that may have sealed their fate. We will explore what those 3 heads truly represent, and why the Targaryens could never quite escape the shadow of their own sigil. The Targaryen motto is 2 sides of the same coin: fire and blood, the destructive force and the life-giving warmth. But a coin can only have 2 sides. A dragon has 3 heads, and if the motto was the ideology of the dynasty, the sigil was its living flesh and blood. The 3-headed red dragon on a black field. It is an image that strikes fear and awe into the hearts of the 7 kingdoms. But it is not just a heraldic symbol chosen at random to look intimidating. It is a literal portrait of the original power structure of the Targaryen dynasty. Aegon the Conqueror, Visenya, Rhaenys. When Aegon decided to forge a unified realm from the ashes of independent kingdoms, he did not rely solely on his own strength or the sheer terror of his dragon Balerion. He relied on the strength of his 2 sister wives. Their union was the bedrock of the conquest. The 3 heads of the dragon were never meant to be a king and his heirs. They were a king and his absolute equals. Visenya was the eldest. She was a warrior queen in a world that rarely allowed for such a thing. She wielded the Valyrian steel blade Dark Sister with a skill that matched any knight of the age. She rode Varga, the youngest of the 3 original dragons, but the one who would grow to become the most feared beast in the world by the time of the dance. Visenya was stern, severe, and formidable. She was the hand that wielded the sword. The shadow that ensured the king's will was absolute. Her approach to ruling was one of command, of enforcing the authority of the family through fear and ancient magic. She was the one who crowned Aegon at the Aegon fort, forging the crown of the Conqueror herself with Valyrian sorcery, a crown of dragon's teeth and Valyrian steel. She represents the bloody, uncompromising aspect of the dynasty. There was no softness in her rule, only the kind of discipline that holds a kingdom together through sheer force of presence. Rhaenys was the younger sister. She was passionate, curious, and charming. Where Visenya was feared, Rhaenys was beloved. She rode the golden dragon Meraxes, a creature of immense grace and terrible power. Rhaenys was the diplomat, the soft power of the Targaryen regime. She was the one who rallied the lords of Westeros, who softened resistance with words where Visenya was prepared to conquer with fire and blood. If Visenya was the discipline, Rhaenys was the grace. Her death in dawn, shot down by a scorpion bolt, shattered the united front of the 3 heads. It sent Aegon into a deep rage and a profound melancholy that never truly faded. The conquest became something different after Rhaenys fell. The 3 heads were never truly whole again. Rhaenys left behind a legacy of what could have been a gentler dynasty that the Targaryens forever tried and failed to recapture. But the concept of the 3 heads is more than just a historical fact of the conquest. It is the core prophecy of the Targaryen faith. The prince that was promised, the hero of the long night. The dragon must have 3 heads. This is not a suggestion. It is a rule of magic, a cosmic law that governs the very existence of the Targaryen dynasty. It means that a single dragon rider, a single head of the dragon, is insufficient to save the world from the darkness that is coming. The Song of Ice and Fire requires a trio. This obsession with the number 3 explains the Targaryen obsession with incest. You cannot face the darkness alone. You need your brothers, your sisters, your kin. You need the 3 heads of the dragon to be united in blood and purpose. It justifies everything: the polygamy, the inbreeding, the isolation. It is the ultimate end goal of their lineage, a prophecy that hangs over every decision made by every king and queen. The ghosts of Visenya and Rhaenys loom over every Targaryen woman who followed them. Rhaenyra Targaryen, the central figure of the Dance of the Dragons, is named for the beloved sister Rhaenys. She inherits Rhaenys' charm, a love of luxury and pageantry. But when the realm turns against her, when she faces the ultimate betrayal, she is forced to become Visenya, to act with Visenya's ruthless ambition. Daemon Targaryen, fierce and savage, carries the sword Dark Sister. He is the spirit of Visenya reborn in a masculine form, impulsive and willing to burn the world to prove a point. These archetypes dictated the roles of women in House Targaryen for generations. Visenya proved a woman could enforce Targaryen rule without apology, that the blood of the dragon was all the justification a queen needed. Rhaenys proved a woman could be the beloved heart of the kingdom, the softer face of absolute power. This reliance on a specific trio, a pure trinity of power, forged a dangerous obsession within the family. If the dragon must have 3 heads, those heads must be of the same blood, the same pure, unbroken line of old Valyria. The fire must not be diluted. This is the defining crisis of the Targaryen dynasty. To keep the prophecy intact, to ensure the 3 heads are true, they turned entirely inward. They began to believe that the blood of the dragon was the only thing that mattered, that any outsider was a corruption, a threat to the very salvation of the world. And this obsession, this science of blood, it leads directly to the most tragic and twisted practices of House Targaryen. It leads to the relentless drive for purity that defines the generation of Viserys and his children. It leads to the dark heart of the next chapter, the purity of the bloodline. We just finished discussing the 3 heads of the dragon, Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys, a brother conquering a continent with his 2 sisters as wives. That single family tree defines the Targaryen dynasty in its glory and its deepest controversy, the purity of the bloodline. To understand it, you have to abandon modern morality completely. This isn't about keeping a throne in the family, it is about magic. In old Valyria, the 40 Dragon Lord families practiced intense inbreeding, not out of simple vanity, but out of a desperate biological need. They believed the ability to bond with dragons was carried in the blood itself. It was a recessive, almost parasitic magical trait. Marrying outside the bloodline diluted that connection irrevocably. Oh, a child of a Targaryen and a non-Targaryen might still hatch a dragon, but the magic was weaker, the bond was fickle. The great dragons of the conquest, Balerion, Vargar, Meraxes, they chose the purest blood. For a family that ruled by fire and blood, losing the power to bind dragons was immediate and total extinction. Every marriage to a cousin, every wedding between an uncle and a niece was an act of survival, a spell cast in ink and ceremony, an attempt to keep the flame of Valyria from sputtering out. But spells have a cost. Keeping the blood pure meant accepting the consequences of a closed gene pool. The Targaryen dynasty was a high-stakes breeding experiment visible to the entire realm. For every strong-willed Visenya, there was a stillborn monstrosity, a child born with scales or twisted limbs that could not survive the night. For every Daemon the good, there was a Baelor the blessed who locked himself in a cell and starved for the gods. Or worse, a Maegor the cruel who fed his enemies to his dragon and sired no living heirs. The coin flips with every birth. The madness is not a metaphor. It is the biological price of purity. To the Targaryens, this risk was an acceptable bargain. The alternative, losing the dragons, was unthinkable. Politically, this practice created a cage of their own making by refusing to trade sons and daughters in traditional marriage alliances. The Targaryens isolated themselves from the very families they ruled. The Starks, the Lannisters, the Baratheons, they were all kept at arm's length. There were no Stark queens in the early dynasty, no Lannister kings. The throne room was a terribly lonely place. A Targaryen alone in the world, as Daemon so often said, is a terrible thing. But this isolation bred more than sadness. It bred fear and resentment. The other houses looked at them and saw sorcerers, men and women who bedded their own siblings with the same casualness as their ancestors ordered the execution of slaves. It made them alien. It made them unpredictable. The faith of the Seven abhorred this practice. Incest was a sin against the gods, plain and simple. For the first century of their rule, this caused immense friction. The faith militant rose up against Maegor the Cruel, bleeding the realm over this exact controversy. The Targaryens were foreign gods ruling a pious land, and the priests had no answer for their heresy. But the Targaryens had dragons. The crisis forced a brilliant compromise. Under King Jaehaerys I and his wise hand Septon Barth, the doctrine of exceptionalism was established. This was the religious exemption the dynasty needed. It declared that the Targaryens were not bound by the same laws as common men. They were the blood of the dragon. They were exceptional. The faith agreed to look the other way. Because what was the alternative? The doctrine did not make incest less abhorrent. It simply carved out a divine loophole for the Dragon Lords. This obsession with purity is the silent heartbeat of the Dance of the Dragons. The war was fought over succession, but beneath the oaths and the crowns, it was a war over blood. Rhaenyra's 3 eldest sons were biologically strong, their father a knight named Harwin Strong. The Greens did not just hate them for usurping the throne, they hated them for breaking the bloodline, for lying about the purity of the dragon seed. When Rhaenyra later married her uncle Daemon, she was trying to take the wheel of the inheritance back into pure Targaryen hands. She was playing the same desperate game as Aegon the Conqueror. But remember, this whole system, the inbreeding, the magic, the isolation, it was all a legacy of a dead civilization. They were not the first to try this. They were merely the last survivors. The entire Valyrian freehold was built on this exact foundation. The 40 families, the blood midges, the pure lines of dragon lords, and it all ended in a single afternoon. Fire from the earth, the sky boiling, an entire civilization wiped out because of a mistake or a rebellion of nature against their hubris. The Targaryens thought they were safe in Westeros. They thought their exceptionalism would shelter them. But the doom did not just destroy Valyria, it left a warning about what happens when you bind your entire existence to a single source of power and a single, fragile bloodline. The Cataclysm of the Doom is the root of every dragon egg that ever hatched in Westeros, and it is the shadow that darkens every step of their dynasty. The Targaryens, as we discussed, kept their bloodline pure through marriages that would make most of Westeros shudder. They did this because they believed it was the only way to keep the bond with dragons alive. But that belief, that entire way of life, was forged in the shadow of a catastrophe so absolute that it erased an entire civilization in a single day. The doom of Valyria. You have to understand what Valyria meant before it fell. It was not just a city or an empire. It was a continent spanning freehold of 40 dragon-riding families, each commanding beasts that could level armies. They had roads of fused stone that never cracked, sorcery that bent the elements to their will, and steel that held an edge forever. And then, in the span of a few hours, it was gone. Not conquered, not invaded, simply erased by the earth itself. The accounts we have are fragmentary, pieced together from the few survivors who fled before the end, and from seers who glimpsed the disaster from afar. What we know is that the 14 flames, the great volcanoes at the heart of the Valyrian Peninsula, erupted simultaneously, not as a gentle flow of lava, but as a cataclysm that shattered the land. The sky turned black with ash for thousands of miles. The sea boiled. The very ground split open and swallowed cities whole. Some say the ancient sorcerers of Valyria had been digging too deep, meddling with forces beneath the crust that they could not control. Others whispered that it was a divine punishment for their arrogance. Whatever the cause, the result was absolute. In that single day, the mysterious volcanic event destroyed the Valyrian freehold. The Dragon Lords, who had ruled the known world for centuries, were turned to ash, their dragons screaming as the fire consumed them. Valyrian steel, the secret of its forging, died with them. No one alive today knows how to make it. The Valyrians could reroute steel into patterns that held supernatural sharpness, and they could temper it with spells that made it lighter and stronger than any common blade. That knowledge vanished in smoke. The art of rearing dragons, too, was lost. The Targaryens had brought a handful of dragons with them to Dragonstone, and those dragons would breed. But the intricate control the Valyrians had over bloodlines and egg hatching, the precise rituals and incantations, faded into legend. How did the Targaryens escape this apocalypse? 12 years before the Doom, a Targaryen princess named Daenerys, the Dreamer, had a vision. She saw mountains spitting fire, cities collapsing, a whole world turned to cinders. she told her father, Lord Aegon Targaryen. He believed her. He sold most of his holdings in Valyria and moved his entire family and their dragons to the remote volcanic island of Dragonstone, far to the west. This was the Targaryens' flight to Dragonstone, based on Daenerys the Dreamer's vision. They were considered fools by the other dragon lords. Why abandon paradise for a barren rock in the Sunset Sea? But when the doom came, the Targaryens were the only dragon lords to survive. Every other family, every dragon they owned, every secret they held, burned. The power vacuum this created changed the history of the known world. For centuries, Valyria had dominated Essos and influenced Westeros. Its collapse led to a scramble for power. New cities rose, the free cities like Braavos, Pentos and Volantis, each claiming the legacy of the freehold but without dragons to back it up. The Giscari Empire tried to resurge, only to be shattered by the remnants of Valyrian steel and dragonfire in the hands of the Targaryens centuries later. And in Westeros, the Seven Kingdoms fractured even further into petty squabbling, unwittingly paving the way for Aegon the Conqueror, who would appear 100 years after the Doom. But the Doom left a deeper scar than just political chaos. It made the world afraid of magic and fire. The memory of that day loomed over every Targaryen reign, a constant reminder that even the mightiest civilization could be undone. And it forced the Targaryens to hoard their remaining lore, to guard the secrets of dragon riding like a sacred flame, because they knew that if they lost that knowledge, no one could ever bring it back. The language they used to command their dragons, the ancient tongue of Valyria, became a dead language spoken only within the family and by a few scholars. How did they learn it? How did they train dragons with a language that no one else could understand? That is a story for another time, when we explore the very words that stirred wings and breathed fire. The next chapter, Speaking the Tongue of Dragons, will pull back the curtain on the high Valyrian commands that turned these beasts from wild animals into weapons of empire. But before that, sit with this thought for a moment. A family that survived the end of the world, carrying the weight of a lost civilization on their shoulders, and knowing that the same fire that made them could just as easily consume them again. That is the inheritance of House Targaryen, and that is why they clung so fiercely to their dragons, their blood, and their words. The Targaryens who fled the Doom carried more than just their dragons and their swords. They carried their tongue. In the smoking shadow of a dying empire, they landed on Dragonstone, clutching a language that would become the ultimate symbol of their otherness. Unlike the common spoken word of Westeros, the language they whispered in council chambers and shouted from Dragonback was a ghost of a lost world. It was High Valyrian, but to call it just a language undersells its power. In the world of House of the Dragon, High Valyrian is a relic, a birthright, and a weapon of control all rolled into one. For our world, the creation of this language was a massive undertaking. The linguist David J. Peterson, who also built Dothraki, was tasked with fleshing out High Valyrian from the fragmentary phrases George R. Martin had scattered through the books. Martin had provided the seeds, like Valar Morghulis, but Peterson had to grow the entire tree. His approach was genius. To give the language that weight of ancient power, something that felt undeniably classical yet alien. He fused two major linguistic foundations. He took the grammatical skeleton of Latin, with its complex declensions and verb conjugations, giving High Valyrian a rigid, ceremonial structure. He then layered over it the phonetics of Arabic, that guttural, throaty richness, the specific consonants, the cadence. When you hear the characters speak it, you hear the dust of a civilization that was already ancient when the first Targaryen egg hatched. It does not feel like a European medieval language. It feels older. It feels, and this was the specific goal, dragonish, which brings us to the most fascinating application of this language in the show. Commands used to control dragons. The grammar behind these commands is incredibly specific. The dragons are not just beasts. They are highly intelligent, magical creatures. They do not respond to simple rote commands like dogs. The grammar used in High Valyrian for dragon commands often relies on the imperative mood, naturally, but with a twist of high formality. It must be precise. Think about the word Dracarys. It is the command for dragonfire, but it does not just mean fire. It means something closer to ignite it, or kindle it, in a transitive sense, directed at something. The verbs are conjugated to show dominance. When Daemon or Rhaenyra shouts down a dragon, they are not just giving an order. They are actively using the structure of the language to enforce their will. The language itself is a leash. If the inflection is wrong, if the declension is sloppy, the creature might not respond. This is why the Targaryens guarded their language so jealously, and that leads directly to the fourth major function of the language in this story. It is the ultimate social and political filter. In the realm of Westeros, everyone speaks the common tongue, but High Valyrian is a wall. It separates the true dragon blood from the rest of the kingdom. The Hightowers might scheme in King's Landing, but can they talk to a dragon in its own tongue? They cannot. The bastards of the realm might have ambition, but do they know the formal vocative case required to hail a dragon in flight? They do not. Speaking the tongue of dragons is the proof of the bloodline. It is the ultimate gatekeeper. When Daemon teaches his daughters High Valyrian, he is arming them with their legacy. When the show presents a scene where Rhaenyra and Daemon speak it intimately, they are shutting the entire court out. They are reminding everyone, and themselves, that they belong to a different species of nobility. It is a tool of isolation and a symbol of supreme authority. The language itself becomes a character in the civil war, but to embody that language, to look the part of the Dragon Lord, the performers must undergo a transformation that is just as rigorous as the linguistics. Speaking like Targaryen is only half the battle. You must also look like one of the blood of the dragon. That iconic platinum hair is not just a costume choice. It is a daily ritual of construction and identity that takes hours to achieve. How the actors disappear under the silver wigs and the prosthetics, and what that transformation costs them, is a story of its own, and it is the exact topic waiting for us in the next chapter, Behind the Silver Wigs. The language of High Valyrian, with its ancient consonants and flowing vowels, was designed to feel like a relic of a lost world, and in that same vein, the actors who bring House of the Dragon to life must themselves undergo a transformation almost as complete as the doom of Valyria, because to step into the skin of a Targaryen is to surrender your own face, your own time, and sometimes your own sanity for hours on end. Matt Smith, who plays Daemon Targaryen, knows this better than most. Every morning, before a single scene is shot, he sits in a makeup chair for 90 minutes. 90 minutes. That is the daily ritual to become the rogue prince. The silver wig is fitted. The platinum locks are shaped. The pale foundation is applied to match that otherworldly Targaryen complexion. But it is not just the wig, it is the weight of it. The heat. The constant awareness that you are not yourself anymore. Smith has described the process as a kind of meditation, a forced stillness before the storm of performance. And when you consider Daemon, a character who lives in constant motion, sword, fights, dragon flights, political schemes, that 90-minute anchor at the start of the day becomes a crucial boundary. It is the line between Matt Smith the actor and Daemon the villain. The uncle, the husband, the dragon rider. The makeup does not just make him look the part, it makes him feel the part, and that feeling is what the audience sees when he sneers or smiles. But transformation is not only physical. For Millie Alcock, who played the young Rhaenyra Targaryen, the journey began long before she ever sat in that chair. She was 10 years old when Game of Thrones first aired. 10. She grew up watching that world, dreaming of dragons and knights, never imagining she would one day become the face of a global franchise. When she auditioned for House of the Dragon, she had not even seen the original series in full. She had to catch up, binge-watching the show that had defined a generation, and somehow step into the role of a princess who would become a queen. That is a strange kind of pressure. To embody a character you once admired from the outside, to become the silver-haired icon that millions will judge. Alcock carried that with her, and you can see it in her performance. The mixture of awe and defiance. The sense of a young woman trying to hold on to her own identity, while the world demands she become something else. And then there is the viral moment that no one predicted. During the press tour for the first season, Emma Darcy, who plays the older Rhaenyra, and Olivia Cook, who plays Alicent Hightower, were asked about their favourite drinks. Emma said, a Negroni Spagliato with a glorious, confident, almost poetic delivery. And that single line, that casual offhand remark, became a cultural phenomenon. The internet exploded with memes, TikTok edits, and a newfound obsession with the cast. It was not planned. It was not scripted. It was just the genuine chemistry between two actors who had spent months together on set, building a rapport that could not be faked. That moment reminded everyone that behind the silver wigs and the political intrigue, these are real people, sharing a laugh, sharing a drink, sharing a bond that makes the show feel alive. But perhaps the greatest challenge for the entire cast is the simple fact that House of the Dragon spans over 20 years of narrative time. The actors must portray characters who age, who change, who grow bitter or wise or broken. Matt Smith's Daemon starts as a reckless rogue and ends as a battle-hardened prince. Millie Alcock's Rhaenyra is a fiery young princess. Emma Darcy's Rhaenyra is a weary, determined queen. And the transition between those versions is not just a matter of makeup or wig changes. It is a psychological shift. The actors have to carry the history of their younger selves into every scene, to remember the pain and the joy that their characters have lived through, even if the audience only sees a time jump. That kind of performance requires a deep understanding of the human arc, of how power and loss reshape a person over years. It is not easy to play someone who has lived decades in between scenes, but they do it, and they do it so seamlessly that we almost forget the wigs are even there. And all of this, the hours of transformation, the childhood dreams, the viral moments, the long narrative arcs, culminates in something far more physical than you might imagine. Because when you watch those dragon riding sequences, when you see Daemon soaring through the clouds on Caraxes, what you are really watching is actors sitting on mechanical contraptions, surrounded by leaf blowers and rain machines, trying to convince themselves they are flying. It is a strange, chaotic, and deeply human art, and that is exactly what we will explore next, when we take a closer look at the machinery of magic in Chapter 27. Riding the mechanical beast, the makeup was finished, the wig was set, the leather straps were cinched tight, the sword was heavy at the hip, but stepping into the character was not the same as stepping onto the dragon. The real test of an actor in this world is not the hours in the chair, it is the hours on the machine. The dragon scenes are not filmed on a beautiful, quiet green screen. They are captured inside a stadium of light. The set is dominated by a curved wall of LED panels, dozens of feet high, encircling the stage completely. This is the volume. Instead of looking at a blank nothing, the actor is surrounded by the full digital sky. They see the clouds racing past. They see the ground 1,000 feet below. The illusion is immersive, almost overwhelming. But the ground beneath the saddle is not illusion. It is metal. It is a hydraulic rig, a mechanical gimbal, built to replicate the spine of a living creature. It is a machine designed to throw you off. The saddle is bolted to this platform, and the platform is programmed with a violent choreography. It bucks, it rolls, it drops suddenly enough to leave your stomach behind, and the noise is incredible. The hydraulic pistons hiss and groan. The motors whine as they shift the weight. The actor must sit on this shuddering beast for hours at a time, gripping the reins, trying to remember the name of their slain child, while a mechanical monster shakes them to the bone to sell the physics of a dive through a storm. The production does not rely on imagination. They deploy the full arsenal of the practical effects team. Industrial leaf blowers roar to life, generating wind strong enough to peel the corners of the eyes open. Rain machines flood the stage, dropping water that stings the skin in the gale. It is raw discomfort, and it is utterly necessary. When you see Rhaenyra blinking the rain from her eyes as her dragon plunges through a cloud, she is not manipulating an expression. She is simply surviving the weather. The performance is authentic because the experience is authentic. This is the profound struggle of the rider. You are asked to deliver the quietest, most intimate moment of grief or rage while strapped to a shaking, screaming engine. You cannot hear your scene partner over the wind and the hydraulics. You cannot hold your eyes still. You have to find the calm inside the collision. The actor has to forget they are on a studio lot in England. They must believe they are on the back of a living god. The machine gives them the physical truth of the flight. The body is already telling the story of the wind and the violence. The actor's only job is to inject the soul into the chaos, to find the silent emotion at the center of the storm. And this is where the digital artisans step in. The VFX team takes the raw footage of the performer fighting the bucking rig, skin wet, eyes red, hair torn wild by the wind. They do not invent a dragon to replace the machine. They paint the dragon, the machine. The physics of the animal are dictated by the physics of the performance. When the gimbal jerks violently to the left, the dragon swerves. When the saddle drops, the creature plunges. The weight of the beast is felt in the strain of the actor's neck, the white knuckles, the way the body absorbs the impact of the landing. The result is the most realistic dragon in television history. The creature is not a special effect. It is a scene partner. The illusion is collaborative. The mechanics provide the truth, and the pixels provide the texture. This commitment to brutal, physical honesty, this insistence on forcing the performer to live inside the reality of the world. It is the defining obsession of the man who designed the war itself, the director who orchestrated the chaos of Hardhome and the nightmare of the Battle of the Bastards. Brought that same philosophy to the Dance of the Dragons. He understood that the beast was not just a weapon of war, but a character with a violent will of its own. The way he conducted the crew, the rigs, and the raw emotion of the actor through the noise of the machine. That creative battle plan is a story worth telling. It is a method called Sapochnik. The mechanical rigs and the leaf blowers were only half the battle. The other half was about something you cannot fake, with wind machines or rain towers. It was about the distance between two faces that were meant to be the same face. And the man who understood that distance better than anyone was director Miguel Sapochnik. You might think that when you recast a character halfway through a season, the smartest thing to do is to get the young and the old version in the same room. Let them study each other's mannerisms, mimic each other's inflections, so the transition feels seamless. That is what most showrunners would do. It is logical, it is safe, and it is exactly what Sapochnik refused to do. Millie Alcock and Emma Darcy never met on set. They never sat down together. They never rehearsed a single scene side by side. At first glance, that seems like a gamble. But Sapochnik understood something deeper about storytelling. He knew that a person at 20 is not simply an older version of who they were at 15. Time does not just add years, it rewrites the soul. Rhaenyra Targaryen, as a young woman, is impulsive, fiery, still intoxicated by the freedom of youth. She rides her dragon like she owns the sky. She laughs in the face of courtly protocol. Millie Alcock captured that with a raw, almost reckless energy. But the Rhaenyra we meet after the time jump is different. She has buried a mother, lost a father, endured miscarriages, watched her stepmother steal her throne. That kind of weight does not just age a person, it crystallizes them. Emma Darcy brought a stillness, a guardedness, a grief that sits beneath every word. Sapochnik wanted those two interpretations to remain distinct. He did not want Emma to become a copy of Millie. He wanted the audience to feel the loss of who Rhaenyra used to be. And you cannot feel loss if you do not see the difference. By keeping the actresses apart, he ensured that when the story jumps forward 10 years, the viewer experiences that dislocation viscerally. It is not just a recast, it is a rupture, and that rupture is the whole theme of the show. Time steals the person you were, and you can never get her back. The choice also protected the performances. If Millie and Emma had rehearsed together, there would have been an inevitable pressure to homogenize. Emma might have unconsciously adopted Millie's cadence. Millie might have toned down her energy to match what she thought Emma would do. Instead, each actress was free to build a Rhaenyra from the inside out, based entirely on the script and their own instincts. Sapochnik shot those early episodes with Millie first, then handed the baton to Emma without any cross-contamination. It is a method that requires enormous trust in your actors, and it paid off. That separation became a quiet legend behind the scenes. Cast and crew knew that the two Rhaenyras never crossed paths. It added a mystique to the production, a sense that something unusual was being attempted. And when the season premiered on August 21st, 22, that choice resonated with audiences in ways that went beyond technical admiration. People felt the ache of the time jump. They mourned the young Rhaenyra even as they embraced the older one. The show had done what great tragedies do. It made the passage of time feel like a wound, and the numbers backed it up. That premiere became the most watched series debut in HBO history, pulling in 10 million viewers on the first night and 20 million within 5 days. The show was a phenomenon, and part of that success belonged to the quiet, almost invisible craft of Miguel Sapochnik, who understood that sometimes the most powerful tool a director has is subtraction, not bringing people together, keeping them apart. The first season closed with a kingdom fractured, a succession crisis ignited, and dragons circling above a realm about to burn. But behind the scenes, a method had been established, a way of working that treated the story's heart as fragile and precious, and that heart would keep beating, even as the dance of the dragons began. What did you think of this journey? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this changed your perspective or taught you something new, consider subscribing for more mind-expanding content. And if you know someone who would find this as fascinating as you did, share it with them. These are the kind of conversations that matter.